My guest tonight is Peter Klein. He's agreed to come back again to discuss a wide area of topics. Peter, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, Tim. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. Peter, he's a member of Independent Media Solidarity. It's a loose affiliation of independent journalists and, I guess, self-styled sleuths who get together kind of to investigate certain things. They are, I think, the most well known for their video "We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook," a film that Peter co-produced and edited, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you can catch that on YouTube. A fascinating investigation into the Sandy Hook incident. What caught my eye a couple days ago was a video you did earlier. It's called "The Batman Theater Shooting." It's time to see behind the cloak. It kind of links together the relationship between false flag terrorism, the spate of shootings, central banking, financial fraud, and maybe the schemes of the global elite. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Sure. And if anybody listening wants to see it, and I think it is a hidden gem on YouTube, to be honest, because it was a real labor of love. And it came about at the time and so the focus was the Batman Theater shooting event, and we did get in. Get into that, but literally, and it's about an hour and 45 minutes, but the first full hour doesn't even get into the theater shooting. It's about everything that I wanted to get across that relates to that and kind of led us up to that point. But if they want to see it, and you got to go to my YouTube channel, and my YouTube handle is Tyranny News Network. So just search that and you'll be able to find it. And it's a couple of years back. So I've learned a few things since. And of course, people who are following or who are somewhat aware of the goings on with the Batman theater shooting trial and James Holmes, they know that trial has concluded, and it was a lengthy thing. And when I put this video out a couple of years back, it had, I had no clue what was going to take place. I was surprised that any trial went forward anyway. So it was all new to me. But the way the video is put together is I divided it into three parts, which are the problem, staged events, and then the Aurora event. And the problem is an extremely detailed section where I go all the way back to some of this financial fraud stuff that I believe is kind of, let's say, if anything, it's the financial engine behind some of these staged events I go into in the next section. And some of it also even relates, I guess, tactically or strategically to that. And certainly the players involved are either the same or overlap, especially when I got into 9/11. And so, like, for instance, when I get into staged events, that second section, I chose a few to go into, and only because it seemed like these were kind of illustrative of certain points I wanted to make. One was the OKC bombing. I also covered the underwear bomber, right? And then people forget that one. I also covered the Arizona shooting, the Jared Lee Loughner shooting, which apparently caused great consternation to Gabrielle Giffords. And also something people may not be so aware of because it's not as high profile, but FBI agent Stephen Ivins was turned up dead after a kind of a manhunt for him, which was unusual. We can talk a little on that. And then I cover also the DC sniper. Very important event overall in terms of these staged events, or what I would describe as staged events. 9/11, and then lastly, Joe Stack, the tax protester who flew his single-engine, very lightweight, non-retractable landing gear plane into the local IRS building, and caused the whole building to go up in flames with a plane that I mind you weighed about 2/3 that of a Mini Cooper. I always try to get people to see what, when they see the damage to that building, and then I describe what the plane was. And it's, minimum stall speed of 54 miles per hour, top speed of 100, I believe. I mean, this thing was this was probably a great plane. Probably flew itself for the most part, but it certainly was not any kind of massive commercial passenger liner type plane. So it was just curious. And plus, also the narrative there is interesting in the way that it's similar. It's similar in that the guy has a manifesto, and his manifesto, which I've read, is I believe it was the way it was emerged seemed to indicate to me they may have not had time, if they wanted, to edit and maybe play around or massage the details contained in that manifesto. I don't know if they had the time, and it seems like maybe they didn't because it seems pretty straightforward. It's all very relatable. You feel sorry for the guy after reading it because you understand a little bit of his plight. And although I would say also that it reveals nothing about an intent to kill himself or to cause harm, I think he was just in a battle with the IRS, and his manifesto, as they called it, was essentially just like a blog post detailing, telling people, hey, don't let this happen to you type of thing. So then finally, after those stage events, I then get into the Aurora event. And I think probably, certainly at that point in time, it was definitely the most in-depth, most expansive, and I wouldn't say necessarily detailed, but I looked into the details and I did my best to try to take a look at it honestly. And so I never made any claims that of one thing or another. Now, you may want to watch the follow-up to that, which I put out just a couple months later, and it was material that I wished I could have included in this one, but I just didn't have the time, and this thing got pretty lengthy, and that was the Anschutz, the Philip Anschutz connection, which is very important because that's as far as can see, it appears that there's a possibility that Philip Anschutz may have had some involvement in the overall event because of his profile in the area there and with the university. And his, I believe he was, Anschutz had one of their grants or something was part of what James Holmes had participated in. And he was also the owner of a competing chain of theaters, actually the main competitor to the chain that was this Century Theater, or was it Century? No, I can't remember. It's been so long. But I think it was like a Century 16 or something like that. But it was I can't recall if it's the Regal Cinemas or the competitor to Regal, but he was the owner of the competitor. And I wondered how much that might have played into this, or at least it was maybe, maybe that theater was chosen, the chain was chosen for one reason or another related to Philip Anschutz. And Philip Anschutz also is interesting, and I go into it a little bit after I cover his how he relates to this James Holmes and the theater shooting thing. He relates also to the death of and the final days of Michael Jackson, because it was his entertainment group that had been chosen to, or rather, in the end, had financed the final concerts, the final performances that Michael Jackson had agreed to put together and participate in. And it's interesting because they hired. It was their decision. Part of the contract with Michael Jackson was that he would have a personal physician to ensure that he was up to the challenge and would be able to make all these performances, which began, I believe, with four, and then went from four performances to eight. And then while they were doing the initial, Michael Jackson was kind of already in the process of rehearsal for their first gig. They went ahead and upped it to 50 performances. So and these things were probably pretty heavy duty operations overall. So I would imagine 50 may have literally been physically impossible, no matter how fit Michael Jackson was. But so Michael Jackson was, in the end, died as a result of, well, we're not 100% sure, but his physician was there. And this guy was charged with crimes. And the family came out and said that they thought that there was wrongdoing here. And I don't know. I'm going to probably I probably am not going to be able to recall the name. It's hyponutria. I can't recall for sure. That's probably very close though. But it's my, I would guess, if I had to guess how Michael Jackson died, I believe that he may have died from overhydration, if you can believe that. Have you ever heard of that before?
I've heard of people drinking, like in contests, drinking too much water, and
Hmm.
an hour or two later dying, and
Okay.
your
That's
cells become gets overhydrated, and
that's it. Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
think
there are processes going on there, but yeah,
yeah.
it's possible to die from simply being. But see, I think he got it through just like you would have you would be hooked up, via intravenous.
Hmm.
So I think he was hydrated intravenously, and they simply overhydrated him, and that's apparently one of the, I guess, if you were looking to kill someone, it's pretty easy to get away with it that way. If in fact maybe it made sense that they were, had an IV for some reason,
Hmm.
so you wouldn't have to be concerned there. But then you die, and there's not a lot that really reveals what the cause would have been. So, but there are some, and that would be a little bit of bloating of the hands and feet. And in the couple of images that I saw of his body, it appeared that he did have bloated, and it was apparently the photos were taken very soon after he died. And the rest of his body, you can see plenty of it, and it appears to be fairly normal looking. But just the hands and the feet were a bit bloated.
Hmm.
So anyway, and of course he was on that propofol stuff, which was for. Have you ever heard the recording of him made by the physician on his iPhone? I think he made a recording of Michael when he was taking care of him at his residence at one point, where Michael is just slurring, and it's horrible. It's really sounds horrific. You ever
Hmm.
heard that?
I never heard that recording, but
Oh
I
God.
know the story was that his physician overprescribed, and because he was
Yeah.
convicted for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and then also another thing was that his staff, and there's some questions about his physician's licensing as well, but he had two female employees, staff people who, before, this was on the day of Michael Jackson's death, and this is all apparently, there we have the witness testimony and all of that. There was a storage facility somewhere. I think it was in Arizona, but I might, or maybe it was Las Vegas, but one of the two locations. So he is, you know, still alive. I don't believe there's been any kind of medical emergency as yet. When two of these assistants, employees working for this physician that was assigned to Michael Jackson, go to this storage facility, which was had one of the units was rented under the doctor's name, and they went there with the key and were logged in and removed some boxes that day. And that was, to me, a very interesting detail because it was apparently the only time that anyone had come and gone in recent history, according to the storage units, who had, they testified that, yes, here they are. I remember them coming. But it all happened on the day of Michael Jackson's death, but before he died. So
Hmm. That's the way
just more details
they
to,
anticipated it. But this links
sure.
back to Philip Inshoot, who apparently is a big player in the Colorado area.
Yes, well, he has it's the Anschutz Entertainment Group, AEG, I
Hmm.
think. And they have like they own gosh, which one is it? They own one of the big stadiums in LA. It's a big controversial stadium too. It's one that the community didn't want to have to pay for, and apparently they subsidized a large portion of it or something.
Yeah.
And he's also one of the largest landowners in America too, which is one of the lesser known points. And he's a weird character. I included a little clip from. I can't imagine what this was other than a. It was kind of like a documentary on the life of Philip Anschutz, but it seems like he may have funded and sponsored it himself because it's got a lot of glowing praise for him. And he does this, he does a lot of it himself. They cut to a clip of him sitting in a boardroom somewhere, and he's describing how when he was a kid, he started a little portable, I believe it was a lemonade stand thing, and he would put it on his little like radio flyer to roll it onto the campus there nearby at one of the schools, a local college or university, and he was in that business. And the way he describes how entrepreneurial he was, and from that point forward, he had to take over his father's failing business because, and he had put it in. He was young; he was only 20 years old, and he was he was already accepted at a local university, but he put his education aside. He told them, "Hold on, you wait." Like they gave a crap.
Yeah.
It's just all about him. Really, it's hard to really watch it because it just feels like it's a love affair with himself that's pretty strong. So I can imagine that guy. Boy, it'd be hard to imagine that he wasn't involved, in some shady dealings.
Hmm.
And of course, then there's the controversies dealing with, like I say, his. Well, in the end, he did fund and the he was his entertainment group was the one that won the deal to put on these last concerts by Michael Jackson, of which there is there. Oh, and then by the way, when Michael Jackson dies, they then put out a production. Gosh, I can't remember what it's called. It's called like "This Is It" or something, and it's a bunch of clips that were filmed during the rehearsals for it. So they were able to capitalize on that, and it was a big seller. It made many millions of dollars for them. But beyond that, somebody pointed out, and I found some proof to back this up, that it just so happened that once Michael Jackson died, suddenly his financial situation turned around incredibly. It was totally fortunate, apparently, that he died because his estate was suddenly turned back into the black and was extremely profitable from that point on, and has been a big success ever since. Which is odd because Michael Jackson, at the time when he was alive, he was eccentric and he made a lot of weird purchases and stuff. And obviously, some of the stuff he was doing was a bit extravagant.
Hmm.
Not to say though that his home or any of this, his lifestyle was gaudy. I was surprised to see the crime scene photos of when he was accused of some child molestation in an earlier case, and at his Neverland Ranch, they had photos that were when they came to serve him and arrest him. They had a warrant to go in and collect evidence, and they photographed his bedroom, and his bedroom just looked like a regular bedroom, and it was extremely unusual from what I have heard about Michael Jackson. I figured there would be like whole stuffed elephants and stuff,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like,
or like a ball, like one of those ballrooms where the kids jump around and stuff. Just whatever,
yeah,
something crazy,
it's like Rococo, uh, you know, decor or something. Yeah,
something, and there was none of it.
yeah.
And the other thing I want to point out while I'm on that topic is just to keep people kind of open minded. Is we have heard a lot about Michael Jackson's proclivities with young boys and all of that. And I feel like there's a lot of truth to it, especially some of the stuff that people don't normally hear. But about him being locked up with a kid in his bedroom for like a month, and
Yeah.
the mother would be bringing him the meals and setting it at the door, and they would just reach out and grab it, and how that was all kept under the rug and stuff. And that sounds like I could see that happening. There seems to be some proof that he was a little weird and may have been involved with some really horrible acts of, with kids, abuses of different kinds.
But he probably
But
suffered. He probably suffered that when he was a kid. So
Well, there's that too,
Yeah,
and that it
I've
does
heard.
seem to
Yeah,
kind of be passed down. But
yeah,
so, I don't doubt that there was something going on there. I don't know to exactly what to extent, but this is something to keep in mind. When they searched the home, again, at the same time they took those photos of the bedroom, they collected every bit of evidence that was relevant. So all of the pornography found in the home in the various locations was collected and identified, and it was straight porn. And it was only a couple of like a beefcake mag or something. I don't know how to describe it,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
seemed like a gay, interest magazine, and then maybe a gay porn. But that the rest of the VHS and the few DVD, I believe it was still kind of early in the history of DVDs. Maybe I'm not 100%, but anyway, very interesting to see that there was no child pornography material, and it was all hetero. Uh, so which is just so odd because it just seems like, or isn't he having sexual relations with young boys, and
Yeah,
therefore wouldn't the material reflect that interest? But apparently there
it
that
didn't.
it didn't pan out there. So it's just odd. I look at things like that when I'm looking at how to and you know why I do that, Tim, is because as you might expect, when I'm hearing from an official source something, I don't have a respect, like I don't have respect for anonymous authorities, right?
Hmm.
I see them as being equally or even more likely or susceptible to corruption.
Right.
And so,
Yeah, they have less credibility than any person you meet on the street. Yeah,
thus, yeah, exactly.
yeah,
There's more evidence that they've got something going on, a reason, oftentimes even to lie, and also because they're authorities. It's some, like in so many cases in our present time, and with our present authority, the various agencies of government, the systems. It's like who pays the price for these improprieties or these acts of corruption, or where they don't comply, where protocol is thrown out the door, and in the end, there's nobody pays. So
but
it's interesting.
yeah, you make the point is it's about his estate, the value of his
That's
estate
right.
rebounding after his death, and that could be a motive right there. If you've done any
Absolutely.
research in the history of rock and roll and who really operates, who really owns the record companies and music industry, and what elements control that, it's not too far fetched to think that maybe someone counting the counting the
Sure.
beans, you say this artist is aging. If we kill him off, he's going to be worth a lot more to us dead than he is alive, and so
Yes.
let's get it done.
Well, there's a lot. See, what I have, it's been so long since I've done this research that, and because I can really only carry so much of this around with me, all I know is I recall digging a lot deeper into that and finding a lot of threads there that seem to indicate that there may have been, or at least the opportunity existed, and it seems almost I think it would be naive to think that they wouldn't have maybe capitalized on that
Yeah,
opportunity to get some, hey, Michael Jackson was maybe burning out. He was in his, they weren't really going to be able to get much more out of him, maybe. And he was also a little bit he was kind of shooting from the hip sometimes, talking about the Illuminati and this and that kind of thing, which I don't
yeah,
think is I don't think anybody looks, even his fans and stuff, probably many of them weren't all excited to hear about that
yeah,
stuff. But, and how much of that is just him acting crazy? That's the
yeah.
other part. It's
So
really hard to say.
so, but
Anything.
in the video, you get into some of the financial shenanigans, corruption,
That's right.
and how these relate to well, kind of what we're facing today. You get into the birth certificate issue, how Social Security, Internal Revenue Code, how these are all designed as sort of a harvesting mechanisms or wealth
Yeah.
extraction mechanisms.
Well, one of the most extremely interesting topics in that area or genre of the research I did was relating to these bonds
Hmm.
going way back to the 30s, and then definitely a lot of activity in the 40s during the World War II era. And so this is all this is around the time of the Bretton Woods agreement between nations, that this is how we'll structure the financial system at a time. Well, you can imagine when you have a world war in that time. I don't know if it would be the same anymore, but it would probably be very different, or at least it would be far more secretive than it was even then. But it was pretty damn secretive then. And very few people know anything about what went on. But when you have a world war, you have to kind of get together with your friends and enemies and make a plan for how to go forward, once the dust settles. And with the financial markets, it's sometimes even more, it's advantageous really to at least have some understanding of what the plan is going forward, whether it's your enemy or your friend, or whether you're going to benefit from it or not, because you'd lose the opportunity of being able to carry on and exist and have an economy and so forth, and be able to participate in various markets where if you weren't a player or were left out of that experience. And one example of why this is so horrible, if you were to be left out, is seen directly, and may have been a big impetus. One of the main causes of World War II in the first place was the results in the aftermath of World War I, in which Hitler was not really given a seat at the table, or rather, I would say not Hitler, but Germany as a nation was not really, they were given the shortest stick really possible to imagine. In other words, it was a very unfair way to deal with Germany in the aftermath of World War One. And look what happened, for what, regardless, let's, just putting aside, what theories we may have as to how it came to be, but it certainly did, it was followed up by the emergence of the Nazi regime and then World War II. And so, and if you look at what Hitler was saying, and rather than look at what the narrative was spun in the New York Times or something, in the lead up and then during the initial phase of World War II, you will see Hitler describing it. It seems almost all related to some of the wrongdoings and how they were kind of, like I say, given the short end of the stick after post World War One. So anyway, so these countries, they get together and they make plans and so forth after wars, which they did with World War One. And then they also do other things too, like start playing around with concepts like, hey, can we get a new, like a one world government in place? And so then you have things like the UN emerge. Surprise, surprise, and then you wonder also what was the plan? And I think there's a lot of evidence that the UN, if they had their way, would have been a world government. And who are they when I say this? I'm sure not everyone, but of course, when you want to, again, think how many countries participate or are represented at the UN, and what does that mean? How many of them are in support of the UN's mission versus just there because they don't want to feel, they don't want to suffer the wrath of not being involved, not having a seat at that table. So it's very interesting. But during the time back in the 1930s, 1940s, apparently a lot of these U.S. bonds were being created. And what these bonds were is, well, it's anyone's guess, but I would assume that they were known by the U.S. government all the way up to Congress and the presidential administration of the time. They were known to exist and have been created, but that I think they also knew that it was a ploy to essentially rob a lot of these countries of their wealth and to position the U.S. To be at a later time more, I guess, capable of controlling these financial markets. And so, for instance, they would give in exchange for gold. And some of these nations knew they were in trouble or knew they had to do something in order to protect their assets. And especially considering the way these markets worked at the time and then what was being planned and then how they eventually worked. It's kind of like you've heard of the petrodollar. Well,
Hmm.
there you go. It's when you if you have to do if you have to conduct your financial exchanges transactions involving oil in U.S. dollars and U.S. dollars only, well, that was not by accident. So, and if you didn't happen to have ready access to U.S. dollars, or maybe you would much prefer to be able to just exchange at the rate with your present currency, it makes sense that you would want to avoid having this kind of monopolistic approach to international finance. But
Didn't
so,
didn't a lot
go
of
ahead.
gold flow into the United States because of World War II?
Well, that's what
Yeah.
this is about.
Okay.
What they were doing is they were offering in exchange for the gold. They wanted to create these central banks, and the Federal Reserve was really the leading entity that uh, emerged over time. And so it was at that they played on that, and the Federal Reserve, which was operated out of America. I mean, there was a lot of connections to other international financial institutions, but it certainly is a major player. I'm not sure if it's the ultimate capstone of the finance pyramid, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is way up there. The
But you could
Federal
say
Reserve, you can't. Yeah.
the same way that power shifted militarily from England to the United States around that time, financial power shifted too to the Federal
Oh,
Reserve.
sure.
But it's hard to say because I think these are transnational interests.
Hmm.
So
Well, that's the other
the
thing.
vessel changes. It goes from
Yeah.
Venice to England to the United States, right?
Sure. And
As the
so maybe we hear a lot about it now. And you know what? Some of that might just be because, if let's say Britain wanted to eliminate the issue in their culture and in uh, you know, their, uh, their citizenry, just the debate and discussion of central banking. They could, essentially export the process to America,
Mhm.
just kind of subcontract it out. And now it's all over here, and they have a kind of, they eliminate the problem or the issue or anyone paying any attention to it. A
Mhm.
lot of that goes on. Like I was discussing issues with a friend the other day, and I said, Indonesia has over 1 billion people, and I can't remember the last time I heard anything about Indonesia in America.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
a non-entity. They got 1 billion people, but apparently nothing newsworthy happens there. How curious. So, but that's the effect of, if in that case it's some partly a language barrier issue, and it's also what the media is willing to cover and where they want to shift the attention and where they want to direct attention away from.
But this gold issue is interesting because that underlies a lot of these various coups and assassinations that have occurred over the past
Oh
50,
yeah.
60 years. Because you've had leaders that have been, so we say, not cooperative, and all of a
Well, they
sudden,
may have cooperated at times, but
yeah,
not always. Yeah.
yeah. And some say that was some of the intrigues behind the Marcos's fall in the 80s
Oh
was
yeah.
he
And
discovered that
there's
his bonds were fraudulent or forged or something.
well, that's the thing is
Yeah.
that this is where you can see. Here's where it gets
And that
interesting.
gets that back to the Yamashita's gold, right? That was
Oh
he
yeah.
got a big chunk of what the Japanese had spent 50 years acquiring, and they're you know and
Yes.
so that gets.
That's right.
But
They
anyway, go ahead. I'm
acquired
sorry,
a
I'm
lot of
wrapping up.
that.
I'm sorry.
No, no, no. And it makes sense because, we've all heard of the Silk Road. And
Hmm.
so, in other words, it's like when people were exchanging money or whatever they had for something of value for what was coming out of the East, and the East was producing a lot of things that were of interest to the West and to other areas of the globe. And so what they would do is they would exchange in the accept agreed upon currency or medium, and gold was a big one. So what happened is the gold began to be accumulated in China and Japan, and also later on there was a lot of gold just happened to be stored in the Philippines, probably as a matter of convenience because of the geographic, I guess, convenience maybe. But also, again, then we have the issue of Marcos and his apparent willingness to play ball But back then they have these, and I've also heard a lot of word stuff that I can't confirm or deny, but there were, like in China, for instance, there were a lot of wealthy families. And these wealthy families were essentially dynasties that lived on and had accumulated a lot of the wealth, a lot of this gold that was then funneled to the Fed, and the intent was to essentially control. It was to get a seat at the table,
Mhm.
really, in these emerging markets. It was also to protect those assets, they thought, and but in exchange for them, they received these bonds. And now, and the thing is, when I've done some work on this, it's been very hard to find really good evidence of these what these bonds are. Just photographic evidence of it, any kind of any reference to it in the media, almost nothing exists there. So we have to kind of go with these independent researchers and also some of these rumors and myths and so forth.
Like Joseph
And
Farrell.
sure,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's
that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Now, how much? What was? Is he someone who's investigated this area as
heavily.
well? Oh,
It
okay.
factors in a lot of his research. He gets into
Oh,
the Black Eagle Trust, the Yamashita's Gold,
yes,
Operation Golden Elite. He calls it the Black Budget. The clandestine finance is like a huge
sure,
underworld of finance, which actually explains much of the geopolitical maneuvering,
sure.
political decisions that could go completely uncommented on in the normal channels of political discourse or political science or media coverage. Just
Yes,
and
absolutely.
which is why most people who just simply rely on conventional sources of news are simply clueless, whereas people who go for the alternative route have some clue but still don't know what's really going on. So,
Well, that's the thing. And you know what? I find it sometimes easier not to be so concerned about whether you can obtain knowledge of what is happening, but maybe it would be better, or at least you can be satisfied in just knowing that what is said to have happened is actually just a bunch of crap,
yeah, yeah, it's
so
almost
to
like
speak.
it's almost like wanting to be God.
Well, I mean, if you,
You can't know. I don't think any one human being has the capacity to figure it all out. It's
well, sure. Well, it'd be nice if we had like the way they sell things in this world. It's kind of like keeping up appearances. It was such an advanced society. Humanity has gone so far, and yet we tend to kind of downplay the frailties and some of the human characteristics like deception and so forth.
yeah,
And also the kind of almost inevitable descent into corruption of every government that has ever existed, as far as I'm aware of, and they've all ended in collapse or failure of some kind at some point.
hmm
But to get back to
yeah.
these bonds, so I looked around and I found some amazing things, though, and these were just, it was actually you can't even imagine what it is that would facilitate these things. Like, what situation arose where this made sense to anyone? But I found pictures, photographic evidence and lots of them, by the way. But some of the best ones, though, were of these, and they are in general of these bonds and how they're packaged. They are oftentimes in these giant metallic, handcrafted metallic chests, right? And they have these, and they on the outside will be emblazoned or embossed with on either a brass plate that's affixed to the front, but it'll say, United States Federal Reserve, and then it'll give you the year, and oftentimes it'll say the amount right on the outside too. And inside there'll be any number of smaller books, which are also metallic, and when you open these up, within those will be a series of bonds, paper bonds, and there may be anywhere from 20 to 50 of them in each one of the books contained. And in some of these larger chests, there would be as many as 12 books. And then what they called a redemption book as well, which was separate from this, but it contained information related to the process of redemption, which is so sad because now in retrospect they didn't have. It's almost impossible to imagine that they planned on actually making good on repaying that gold or that whatever,
So
because
it was just a gold heist. A
It was a
scam.
heist.
Yeah.
Well, it was, and they would like us. I think if anybody who digs deep enough, if you get to a point, you're going to start reading some information that appears to be disinformation, intended to make it appear as if this was a rogue operation where the CIA was counterfeiting these bonds, that type of thing.
Hmm.
And I would argue that it looks more to me like it was all on the up and up in terms of the official U.S. government position. They were aware, and whether they were extremely enthusiastic about it, I don't know, but it appears that they had knowledge of this happening, and therefore it was not a rogue operation run by the CIA or something or some other agency that was a kind of an underground crime taking place.
Hmm.
And these are nations, conducting business with other nations. These bonds had the signatures of the Treasury and the Fed Reserve chairmans and stuff. These were not. These were very well. First of all, they were ornate, as you can imagine. They were extremely detailed. They had some bizarre misspellings and some odd I guess maybe alterations of correct proper names of things and so forth that did indicate there may have been an attempt to even like design them intending to later on claim them to be frauds.
That's what I. Yeah, that's what I heard is what Marcos discovered, that there was,
Yeah,
and that they sold them.
yes,
Like he took them in good faith because he got a big chunk of the gold that the Japanese had seized, and then
yes.
he gave the U.S. Fed the gold. They got the bonds, but the bonds were intentionally had them with these slight errors where they could then claim, hey, they're fraudulent.
Which actually, in
Yeah.
retrospect, looking back, it just shows you the difference between then and now. So if we look at, let's say, 1940 or something versus now,
Hmm.
it shows you the mindset in 1940. They had concerns about whether they could make the claim and get away with it that these were fraudulent. But
Mm.
in the present day, it appears that they don't give one hoot
Oh yeah, because
about how.
even with Bretton Woods, you had some pretense of redemption at some level.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so
And now,
they couldn't even keep to that.
well, and then society, of course, has been
Yeah,
dumbed down and we've
yeah.
been misdirected and we're focused on other things. So now, and the media, the news tends not to report so diligently and has kind of an agenda that, so they're more than comfortable and certainly have demonstrated that they will just stop covering certain things. So, so what happened though with these chests of bonds? But my favorite one is a photo. There are a few photos of this from the outside of the chest, the greater chest that contained all of this. And it's somewhat, it has a patina on it. You can tell when you look at these things that it's either expertly aged, if it were fraudulent somehow, created in a more recent time. But this chest in particular was dated 1936, I believe. So it gives you an idea of when, relative to World War II, 36 is early.
Hmm.
So it's interesting that they were doing it then, but it also, gives you a clue as to the politics of the time. But on the outside, it says 1936, United States Federal Reserve Board, and it'll say like of Chicago or something too. They
Hmm.
tend to, refer to the specific office of the Fed. But and then it'll say spelled out and then also numerically. And in this one chest, I believe it was $4.3 trillion
In 1936.
in 1936 money. Okay. So you got to think how now. See again, that makes you wonder. See, that's also why when have shared some of this with people, or those who I've just discussed this issue with, who were somewhat aware of this type of thing, some of these people just say, that's ridiculous. This is a joke, or that's not real. And I would argue, well, they went to a hell of a lot of effort then, because I've also seen all of the documents taken out from each of these, or many of these, where I've seen these bonds, I've seen these redemption books, I've seen the names, the dates, the terminology used to describe the nature of these things. And let me tell you, these were well done. Now,
Hmm.
in the time that it's transpired, much later on, there were also similar bonds created, and sometimes it's almost a mirror version of an earlier exam or earlier series. But you'll find that over time they do kind of change in format. They get a little more modern. You find in the earlier versions, of course, they're not. This was before the age of computing and so forth. So these were printed, like lithograph type print
Hmm.
jobs and stuff. So they're well done. Over time, though,
Embossed and all that. Yeah.
yeah, and then of course, then you have the embossing of all the ornate books and the chests themselves and stuff. And I've also seen some photos of a series of these things where it looks like maybe there are 8 chests, and then they open up and take the books out, and there are just dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe of the books there. And I went, and they were very. They looked like there was a lot of corrosion on both the chests and the books inside. So they were probably buried somewhere or stored somewhere where the conditions were really bad for it. Because I think over time they got better at kind of sealing these things.
Hmm.
So from the humidity, because there was some value. You can imagine if this chest, if you could get 4 point something trillion dollars if you just took this chest over to and I believe that one was a 60-year uh, uh, period before they could be redeemed. But some of these others, I'm not sure how long these nations were expected to wait before they could. And some of these also, there were some exchanges going on beginning much earlier relating to these bonds where they began to redeem a bond or, they had like as part of the redemption, you see there's a schedule where there was maybe the earliest time at which you could redeem and what that amount would be for, how much of this total that you have in bonds, what their value was, could be redeemed at that time, and then the schedule going forward. And there were even a couple of instances where there appeared to be, examples of these transactions having occurred with an official stamp. And so it's kind of like, yes, your receipt for your exchange on this portion, but it was just the tip of the iceberg, probably less than 1% or something.
Would
But
you,
it showed the intent was there to at least acknowledge in those cases, and I don't know how much of this went on and how prevalent it was, but at least in those cases, we see evidence of the total agreement that, hey, yes, we acknowledge that these exist and we're beginning to make payment on them, you know?
do you recall a few years ago when a couple of Japanese businessmen were caught in Switzerland trying to pass off
Yes.
counterfeit, quote, counterfeit bearer bonds with
Yes.
astronomical denominations on them
Yes, and I think it was in the billions.
in the billions. And of course, the point is someone said, well, that's like, obviously they're counterfeit because the denominations are so high. What that suggests is, or what it says is that somewhere there has to be some real ones out there with.
Well, no, what I'm saying is
Yeah,
that I actually think that they are almost in every case
they were real.
they're real.
Yeah,
They're real in the sense that they were made
yeah,
and presented as real
yeah.
by the United
At the
States to
time, yeah,
these at the time. And
yeah.
you got to, hey, you really have to think, I mean, look, as a society, this is we are supposed to be, when it comes down to it, if you pay attention to any of these Hollywood movies they put out, and I'm sure most people have at least at some point, there's always especially when they portray like a president or any high ranking official. If we're not talking about the movie The Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel, which may have kind of broken away from that trend, but most films always show us to be kind of at least aspiring to these higher values. And in a situation where we're talking about another country saying, here we are, we need to redeem these bonds, you would, if you went by what Hollywood projects as the demeanor of our U.S. Authorities, you would find these people would at least open it up for discussion. They would probably be an attempt to find a middle ground, like, those are some heavy, like, wow, that would destroy our economy. So can we work something out? And you know what? There's never any. The U.S. is a power. We're hugely militarily strong. So there's no way that anyone's going to muscle us. So it seems almost like it's poor sportsmanship the way we've dealt with this, because apparently in almost every case where these bonds emerge, even when they try to test the waters, And there have been examples. China, for instance, did a sting, as I understand it, on an on a series of American bonds. They had their suspicions that these would not be honored. So they went about a process of contacting individuals, and they began, I believe, with the Fed board, who then directed them to the Secret Service, I think. Because again, a lot of this stuff, it's whoever, is it the Secret Service that handles counterfeit money?
Yes.
I think, okay, well, then that's why they did
Oh,
that.
well, I know they used to be part of the Treasury Department. Now they're
Okay.
Homeland Security.
Well,
But
at the
traditionally,
time,
traditionally, the Secret Service, one of the primary jobs was was counterfeiting.
well, this is why I believe that then, when they went to redeem these, over time, maybe, the organizational structure in America may have changed or something, but either way, for whatever reason, and it's probably because of that very issue of, I guess, verifying the authenticity of the bond. So they redirected them when they made contact with the Fed to the Secret Service, and then they made arrangements to meet. And so I believe what happened is these individuals met with the Secret Service. And actually, no, back up. As I understand it, as you say, it became DHS. So what I believe happened is that either the Secret Service redirected them to DHS internally or up the chain or something, but they didn't finally wind up with Department of Homeland Security agents or authorities. And that's where they finally made a physical contact, where they met with them and said, here they are. And after meeting with them briefly, they said, okay, well, we're going to need to go ahead and verify these. So we'll hold on to these and we will get back in touch with you. So 2 weeks later, they call them up and they're like, what bonds? Literally. They just didn't even care. They
Well,
just said, sorry. Can you believe that?
well, it's gang. They're just it's again you're dealing with gangsters.
Yeah, well, or certainly they're playing
Yeah.
gangsters in the way they behave if they're doing stuff like that.
Oh,
It's so astonishing, though, to think that, to go to that length and then to have them say, we need to check on the authenticity of these. I mean, come on. Well, I need to check on the authenticity of your humanity.
yeah. But it was. I
Crazy.
think I was listening to an interview with Catherine Austin Fitz, and she's giving her explanation of what to expect with the global economy and
Mm,
the future of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, given
sure.
the policy of the Fed and the fact that various power blocks have made moves, to undermine the petrodollar and the dollar as the reserve currency. And looking at the fundamentals, there's absolutely no reason why the U.S. dollar should be the reserve currency at this point. Well,
Oh,
she
yeah.
she made a couple of very important points. She said, well, first of all, the vast majority of the international transactions are handled through U.S. satellites and infrastructure, and
Oh,
so
really?
the cost of converting this stuff, it's hugely inconvenient and uncomfortable to make that conversion to begin with. So
Uh-huh.
that's an advantage for I guess the Anglo-American sphere of maintaining the
Wait,
current.
when you say satellites, are you referring to other friendly nations, or are you talking about like Puerto Rico
No, no,
and?
talking about the clearing processes for international
Oh,
transactions.
okay,
Okay,
gotcha. Okay.
it's all U.S. controlled infrastructure.
Hmm.
Uh, um, and I suspect any government or bloc countries that would try to put up a competing infrastructure might find some, cyber hacking here or revolution here, that sort of thing. Uh, you know, uh,
Sure.
colored revolutions popping up. Another thing is she's ultimately the global economy. It's not you can't just apply fundamental economics to it. You have to. It's ultimately it's a military question.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
then there's that. Well, that's the problem we
yeah,
have today when we're trying to, again, keeping up appearances.
mhm,
We have to tell one story, but ultimately underneath that, the friendlier version is always put out, but behind it is going to be that one. Yeah, as
mhm,
you say, it might involve. It's like U.S. interests is a concept that when we're dealing with news of foreign nations, how it's presented in America, especially,
mhm.
it's never about our aggression in that nation. It's always about, well, we have U.S. interests and we're protecting them. But see, it's what do you, and you know what? A lot of Americans actually believe and buy into that too. On that level, it's kind of like they believe the lie, but it reveals just as, at the same time, just how horrible that person probably is, at least in their thinking, because, like when we go and invade a country and they think that that means we're going to get their oil. And they are in support of that concept.
Yeah, even though they're getting ripped off in the process.
Well, and then yes, then the truth though is
Yeah,
always something else that's even more
yeah,
insidious and even more terrifying. But it's just it reveals how the gap we have here between the reality of what's going on geopolitically and what the typical American is able to digest and become aware of, and then what their reaction to that is and what their opinions are. So what then would they be faced? What would they then be if they knew the truth? What would they be in support of? That's just as frightening sometimes, I think.
yeah. Again, I'll refer to Catherine Austin Fitts. She gave a talk about the narco economy, how it relates to the U.S. economy, narco dollars, and how they've been fully integrated into the U.S. financial system through corporations, through Wall Street,
Hmm.
401ks, and how many people's retirements are based on the influx of drugs and the outflow of cash from the sale of those drugs that are
Yeah,
destroying the communities in which they live or which their neighbors live in.
yeah.
And she get an example of basically, if you're a crack dealer in Philadelphia and you have 6, 7 kids working for you, they're bringing 100K a year. You have all this cash. What do? You buy KFC, and you become a part
Hmm.
owner in KFC, and you just dump the money in there. And that corporation owns KFC is publicly traded, and how many people are invested in that through their,
Oh,
you know, so
interesting.
it's all based on growth. And it's just often as she travels, she observed that she went through like hotels that had almost zero occupancy to stay in business.
Oh,
Yeah, so
really?
these companies,
Oh,
businesses are laundering operations for drug cash, and people invest and they're publicly traded. And of course, if you earn $100,000 a year, what does that do to the value of the stock? You know,
well, and you know what? This reminds me of a frightening thing to consider. It's a possibility, but I heard a couple rumors that, and it just seemed like this was like in a blog. It was, I think, on a blog in both instances,
hmm
but it was very intelligent debate going on in the discussion. And somebody popped in and said, and I can't recall all the details, but the essence of their message was that, for your information, drugs, as the drugs that are imported and processed the whole thing by American agencies and then brought into America because eventually they have to get distributed to the users
hmm
themselves, and they have to make those financial transactions and profit from it. That they were actually utilizing Walmart for it as a distribution mechanism. That
yeah,
they're trucking. Have you ever heard that?
I've heard listened to a conversation about Jade Helm, and
Huh.
the skeptical interlocutor of the guest. He brought up Walmart. He says, and without agreeing with the guest, he goes, "Well, I'm not surprised with that. Look at Walmart. You don't. I know retail. I know retail. It's a low margin business. You don't grow that fast for such a low margin business, highly competitive business. How'd they get
Uh-huh.
that big? And the
Huh.
idea they got that big because a large part of their cash flow is drug money.
Yeah.
And the same thing with, what I understand, with Bain Capital.
Oh, Bain.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
these huge corporations that are capitalized, like Staples,
Hmm.
that are displacing regional, local businesses,
Oh, yeah.
are being heavily financed with illegal drugs.
Oh, that's such a weird. That's so much. That's so enlightening to hear when you consider the way
Yeah,
Walmart, how they operate and you really shut out all the mom and
yeah.
pops and
Not
stuff.
to mention
Oh,
like they take
wow.
advantage of like eminent domain things like that. But I'm
Sure.
saying the more insidious thing is these corporations that are centralizing the economy. They're destroying local regional businesses that have local character, local sort of local patriotisms and pride in the community. They're being
Sure.
destroyed. And also, these are these small to mid-sized, large companies that were regional were a great source of well-paid middle-class jobs.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
instead of these large corporations, so you're simply rotting out the domestic economy. This isn't just because these corporations have economies of scale, they're efficient, and they're offering better prices to the customer. I don't blame a housewife who's clipping coupons, trying to save money on the bottom, trying to get to on a
Yeah, no, no,
budget the
no.
same way at these large box stores. They have better prices. But
Absolutely.
notice how insidious it is, though. There's the larger macro economy is destroying, and at the same time,
Yes.
they're importing drugs into the community that are
And
destroying community. It's
and
like
they're
the opium wars.
federalized. They're federalizing America, which is part of the overall
Overall
plan for
plan.
some of these folks. They
Yeah,
want control. They don't want states' rights, and this is one way to
yeah.
do it.
And
Get rid of any individualism.
that's one way you can bring in the culture of Marxism and whether you want to destroy the Confederate flag or attack local cultures. This whole
Yeah.
monoculture. I think it's a whole monoculture agenda.
Oh yeah.
And when you get in, and the only way you kind of get an understanding how it's working is you have to like t- consider these different dimensions to it, and you start
Oh
to
yeah.
see the bigger picture. Um, and so it again, you're creating this fascistic monoculture. At the same time, you're importing the drugs, and it's all built into the system. But it was Catherine Austin Fitz's point was about she was spelling this out how this relationship works. And if you want to know how it works, it was dramatized on Breaking Bad, the series. How
Great show, by the way. I really liked
how
it.
the guy's chicken franchises was owned by this corporate conglomerate in Germany. And
Oh, I never caught that.
yeah,
I
that's
did see the way. I bet it made sense
yeah,
immediately when I was watching the program. I
yeah,
kind of watched it all at one time after it had already been come and gone. I didn't think I would like it. I didn't know what it was about, so I had no clue. But I thought it was very good, and yeah, it was very interesting to see how that guy, very unassuming guy. Now,
yeah.
I wonder how much of that is true that someone with such a high profile who was such a big part of this drug dealing that was apparently somewhat sanctioned in America. Of course, you know what? I think even then, in that program, in Breaking Bad, the the narrative that they were putting forth was that there was still the threat of being busted by, I believe, the FBI, if I'm not
Or
mistaken,
the DEA.
or the DEA.
The
So one
reality
of, yeah,
is the DEA, they go after certain drug dealers.
sure. So it didn't,
Yeah,
but they didn't cover that. They didn't get into that,
yeah,
I believe. I think they pretty much just wanted to put out the,
yeah,
as cover for their,
yeah. It's
but
a
yeah.
well, limited hangout.
Well,
What do you expect?
exactly. We get a little bit. And I also, about just to comment on Breaking Bad, I also appreciated the way that they were somewhat at least realistic about the approach of what methamphetamine was.
Yeah,
In other words, instead of making it like whatever that, gosh, that's one of those reefer madness where people
yeah,
are
yeah,
running and jumping out windows. These are people who could be under the influence of methamphetamine, still have a conversation with
yeah,
someone.
yeah.
So I thought that was probably a little closer to reality.
And the rationalizations are he made a higher quality drug, which wasn't quite as dangerous.
Oh, yes, the hierarchy. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, sure. Very funny.
but
But yes,
I kept,
Catherine Elson Fitz is great, by the way. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
she's awesome.
Great source of information. She says that she spells this out, and she's talking to this church group, a Christian group, and she says, now if you could press a red button and you could stop the sale of drugs, but this would cause the value of 401ks to plummet, would you do it? Raise your hand, and only like two people out of an audience of 250 raise their hand.
Oh man. Well, and you know what? That's not. I don't blame them, but I'll tell you what. I think they're wrong.
Yeah,
They're goofy, but I think I wouldn't. That doesn't surprise me.
yeah,
Although I do feel like I would have probably guessed maybe at least a few more would have said sure. But I guess in the end, because a lot of people want to at least come across as I'm a goody two
yeah,
shoes.
yeah.
Sure. You get the hands up, okay, and they feel guilted into doing it at least. So that's
Because they know
surprising.
it's not going to happen.
Well, if they were able to do it,
Yeah,
if it's just a hypothetical,
yeah,
yeah, shut it down. Shut down. Well, I would say also, I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't say if that included shutting down all drugs, all illicit drugs, period, and outside of the official,
hmm
sanctioned operations, I would be less, I would be more hesitant then. But when it comes to the ones, well, and it's interesting because I remember in doing when I was working, like filling out forms on my 401k at a new job, and they would give you options on which group of funds to invest in, right? And the way they refer to them be like the Pan-Pacific Group, and just whatever the. And it's funny now because I think of it as, what, now it might have just been more accurate to call this the Heroin Group and You know what I mean?
Well, the
So,
huge financial houses go back to history with the opium trade.
yeah,
They established the banking houses.
sure.
And it's funny you talked about earlier, talking about China as well. You know, China had nothing, didn't want anything from England, so England had to pay gold for the tea. So what they do is they grow the opium in Pakistan, India, and they market it aggressively in China. So
Hmm.
now they're exporting opium instead of gold. You know, and
Yeah.
at the same time they're destroying the local agriculture in India. You know,
And
so
it's astonishing how the depth, well, it's like when essentially China was really, well, there was just a lot of havoc wreaked there by Britain because of this whole opium,
mhm.
this influx of opium. And it turned them all into opium addicts. But who cooked up that scheme, you
Yeah,
know? Maybe it evolved slowly somewhat, but it feels like there was some strategy there at various points where they had foreseen that maybe if we did this. Well, it reminds me of a funny skit from a program. I can't remember. It's a British program. It's by the guys who used to do the show Peep Show. Very, very funny guys. And they were doing a skit where it's a government, some kind of bureaucratic body, and the three of them are sitting together, and the supervisor asked, "Did we run the numbers to see if we killed everyone? Would that, and or if you know what I, or if we included some kind of poison in their medication?" And then the debate basically, of course, they looked in disgust, like, "Oh, of course not." And they thought, "Well," and then one of the two subservients there said, "Yes, well, it wouldn't have made more sense. It wouldn't have been profitable, and it would have been economically less. It would not have been as advantageous as you may think." And the other person says, "Well, I actually disagree," and
yeah,
then the debate went on from there. But they, in the end, they were forced to go ahead and run those numbers.
yeah.
So I guess bureaucrats need to have something to do. But just to think in those terms and wonder, when they figured, at some point in time, maybe if we got all these guys hooked on opium, we would, achieve certain things. And it's sad to think that that's the history. But then I just want to stop. I want to put it to an end. I'm trying my best, and that's what I think all of us activists, at least the ones in our group at IMS, and many of the people that I come into contact with who are like-minded. It feels like we're trying to make a difference, trying to make a better world, and it's true and honest. It's not like none of us are looking to be heroes. Maybe a few of us are looking to have a slightly higher profile in the process, but
Mhm.
for the most part, we're just trying to get this taken care of. And the concern we have is, like, for instance, as was happening years ago with this whole China opium issue, um, and how just horrible it was. Well, it's essentially still happening today in various ways. It's like nothing was really shut down. It's just that the times changed and various, when things occur, you need to kind of shift around. You slightly change your position, but the corruption is still there. And
Mhm.
as time has moved, as we've gotten closer to the present, it's gotten more and more cloaked in secrecy, or rather, maybe as a result of the propaganda campaign that exists, the overarching propaganda that's really kind of in place in all of the various aspects of our society. Maybe that has also helped us to become more blind to this corruption. And even if we're conscious of parts of this corruption, we may also become more accepting of it as a result of ongoing. Because you know what, if your neighbor isn't up in arms, why should you be?
Mhm.
There's that to think about.
But
It's
this,
amazing.
you're creating an entire system based on corruption, and I think you kind of got into in the video when you lay out I guess the four pillars, which is the judiciary, police, secrecy, and media. And this
Yeah.
gets into this, maybe we can kind of dovetail this into a discussion regarding how this vast system of financial fraud, extortion, is maintained,
Hmm.
uh, uh, basically built on, I guess, a foundation of human misery and exploitation.
Yeah.
Um, and why, how this relates to maybe some of the psychological warfare tactics that we're being apparently subjected to. in the past few decades.
Yeah.
Good. Maybe I guess to bring up some of these examples. I guess the basic idea behind these things is to create a society that is fearful, atomized, and not able to really think these things through. Therefore, they're easily to be manipulated, to be marketed to, and
Mhm.
ultimately to be exploited or harvested. Right? Now, that's a good way to put it, I guess. Would you say? Is that a
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that, well, I personally will never, well, at least at this point, I couldn't bring myself to claim to know what their
yeah,
agenda is ultimately. But I think what you've put forth there is a pretty good assessment given what I think we may be able to say we do know. And it appears in, I mean, we also can use our, we can kind of put two and two together and
hmm
we can look at it with common sense and see that, yes, much of what you said seems to be almost certain, and a lot of it seems pretty damn sure to be going on. But ultimately, though, I always have the problem as I'm working through any of this. If I knew ultimately what they were looking to do, if their ultimate goal could be known to me, then as I'm looking at the various steps taking place to the stages of the implementation, I would see it for what it is more
yeah,
clearly because I would know, well, I know they're not looking to do that, so that's not why they did this, and it would all come into focus, I think. So I'm always concerned about and thinking and trying to understand ultimately what the agenda is. And you mentioned that it's this corrupt system, and it's the systemization of that. It becomes endemic, and it's part of the very. It's the really the system as a total, but then the systems within are also integrated. It's to a certain extent, I imagine there's some kind of, it's almost like a self-fulfilling thing. It's like
yeah.
an automated system in some ways. I've always wondered how multi-generational conspiracies could occur because of, once you're dead and gone, how are you going to know that your descendants are going to carry forward with the plan? And how important would it be for them to care? If you're dead and gone, why is it of any concern to you anyway? Or that type of thinking. And then I realized that, well, I guess maybe if there was a really well designed structure to the conspiracy, it may contain some kind of built in, uh, let's say, bait or something for each successive generation in which they just can't resist. And so they just take the bait and go forward with it. And that is seeming more and more like a possibility. But still, ultimately, we're dealing with people and human behavior
Yeah.
because, at the end of the day, we've got like a president and administration, we've got Congress, we've got various nations, and we've got the various states and their governments, and even down to the local governments, the town councils, and all of that, the
Well, I think as
mayor.
yeah,
Oh,
as a I guess as a method might be you might get an idea of if you look at Freemasonry or something, where you get rituals and
oh yeah,
that,
sure.
and it's not just weird, mystical stuff. Although that factors into it, this is a practical way to organize
Yeah.
in secret and to create a system of rewards and punishments, and that's a great way to motivate people: reward and punishment.
Yes, I've thought about actually recently. I thought maybe I should become a Freemason because I really could use some connections. I just really, and I don't mean that I'm not extremely serious about it,
Yeah,
but it crossed my mind
yeah.
because it was just one of those things. And I also thought, I would like to go ahead and know what they know, and I got a feeling it isn't a lot. But and hey, there's always the possibility that I personally could influence the Freemasons.
Yeah.
I could have my put my stamp on them, and it may be that they're in need of that kind of thing actually, because I don't know how much of what their original intent was is still really driving them, and it may be more of just like a social club, or let's say like a kind of more widespread nepotism type thing.
Well, they say there's different levels, rings within rings. So the first brethren and vast majority have no idea what's going on. It's just the top level, and the idea behind it isn't so much the it's ideational, not organizational, meaning that it doesn't go back centuries. It's just the methods of it are applied to achieve nefarious ends.
Sure.
You know,
And
like the
hey,
mafia or something. So
well, yeah, whatever that is,
yeah,
I'm still trying to figure that out. But
Costa
the whole
Costa.
thing, yeah, well, I guess I know that these, well, like I was saying though, with the human behavior and just kind of the immediacy, just the day-to-day aspect, rather than trying to see it over time or even looking back in history, I'm trying to look forward sometimes and think, well, how are we going to, how do we work with this now?
Hmm.
And sometimes I have to, like in my research into propaganda recently, I've come to realize a few things, and maybe I have in front of me here. I have some notes from, and believe it or not, I actually write a lot of emails back and forth with some of the members of IMS and other individuals whom I have shared interests, or whether just I find some of these people fascinating. But in response to someone's comments about what IMS should be focused on in the present, and they also threw in that they were reading up on some, I forget the gentleman's name, Frenchman, but he's famous for his, uh, I guess, more modern and more expansive understanding and expose of what propaganda really is. And how much more pervasive and how it isn't as simple as it was originally thought to be, and the overall just the impact on our world. But I'm trying to find the part here that I thought this might be relevant here, and it was, let's see. Um, Oh, it was ultimately when it came down to it, I realized that like I had here's one of my earlier plans as to how we may be able to make more rapid change to end this corruption. And the corruption, specifically, especially you can imagine how we may view things having done the Sandy Hook documentary. So the focus being how it uh, is manifest in these staged events for whatever purpose, but it's related to the propaganda. It's kind of an active form of it, and but definitely very much tied into the overall propaganda that takes place in America and the world at large. But so I was very concerned about how to put an end to that, and I've always said that we know, the Sandy Hook event took place on December 14th, 2012. And I've said to people before, I said, if there was some kind of technical glitch in which all of the major networks and the cable subscription based programming services were somehow uh, broken down and couldn't transmit or broadcast on the 13th, let's say, and that was being worked on, there is no way in hell that Sandy Hook would have happened on the 14th. You follow me?
Yeah, yeah.
So, in other words, think of so now look at how that appears to be two totally separate things, totally disconnected, based on the narrative that is out there officially. What difference would that have made, right? If school was going, hey, if kids were heading to school, if Adam Lanza was still in the mental state he was in, and how much of that would have been impacted by the TV networks being turned off, the night before. So but it's interesting, and it says point blank that I believe that this was a propaganda mechanism that required media distribution, probably real time or very close to real time, so that it could play out on the timeline that was already drawn up. And had that not been available to them, which seems unusual to imagine it would have happened, but that got me thinking. And I thought, well, what about doing something like encouraging groups, like leaderless groups, like an anonymous thing, to conduct operations of sabotage? And I don't mean anything necessarily violent or even super destructive, but it's kind of like hackers who might, when they hack into a website and take over the homepage of the site and put up a kooky picture and some kind of politically driven messaging, right?
Hmm.
That's that type of thing. So this is like an extreme form of vandalism. But my theory was that uh, if in fact it could be done, like if people who were familiar with or experts in the area of broadcast transmission of both the networks. And of course, all of this stuff is virtually, it's almost all sent via the cable, local cable providers in every community in America, and then also via the so-called satellite, dish
Hmm.
and this and the like and similar companies. But that all of that though, if you think about it, all of this material has to be it begins somewhere, right? Of course, then it spreads out into all these communities, and so it's kind of it's that's the meaning of the term broadcast as opposed to narrowcast or unicast. It's broadcast in that it's got its various tentacles spreading out from there. But if you trace it all back to its source, it begins in one place. And it's kind of like if you think of the news being the worst example of this horrible media that's inflicted on us every day. The 24-hour news, cable news networks in particular, like CNN, well, they have their headquarters or their CNN studios where virtually, well, a large part of the day's programming is being broadcast from the studio right there and live, or live with a 5 second delay or whatever the heck it is. But that means that there's got to be a way for them to get that uh, signal out to the rest of the world, and it begins right there at that facility. So I thought if experts in this general technology might decide, kind of like those people did when they busted into that FBI office and we learned about COINTELPRO, if they could do something similar and do this as kind of like if it would become a new trend, and over a short period of time, we found a way to shut it all down. And I mean, just turn it off so that and I wrote up a little thing that was almost poetic. And at one point it got to where it even said that when the TiVos ran dry, right? Because
Hmm.
stuff, you have your DVR, you can record some of that, but how much of a fix, how bad would you need that fix for television programming if your TiVos ran totally dry? Well, if you could get nothing but static on TV, I think we'd have answered much of the problem, but it would be temporary. And my theory is that we would, whoever did that, and I say we, but I don't even think I would probably qualify for an operation of this kind. I was just thinking of the idea. And, uh, and of course, what I realized though is every time I brought this up with someone, and Tim, I'm going to guess it's probably happening with you right now as well, there's this tinge. You get this weird, it's like it gives you a feeling. I don't feel it because I'm already past that and proposing the idea. So I obviously am in favor of it, at least on one level, because I'm even discussing it as a possibility. But when I share this with people, no matter how I present it, um, every person I've discussed this with gets this weird feeling like, no, that's wrong. We have to avoid. It's like they see it as maybe this is like a violent act. Maybe there would be some kind of damage, maybe even an explosion or two. But if no one was harmed and the threat was virtually nil that someone would be harmed in the process, then we're just talking about property destruction ultimately. And like I say, an extreme case of vandalism. And it may be costing, may cost millions of dollars for a fix to be made to whatever damage was caused. But people will always, invariably, I discovered, they will always seem to feel like, no, that's wrong, that's bad. We shouldn't do that. There has to be another way. It's like you can vote them out of office, that logic.
Well,
And
unfortunately, yeah, yeah.
well, but here's the thing. I learned though, and plus I also think that they have this sense. It's like part of the propaganda. They have a sense that there's at least some value coming from what the media broadcasts.
That's what I that's what I try to stress to people. And if you caught my podcast with Jay Dyer last week,
I did.
and
Yeah.
you have to look at media broadcasting now is completely fake. It's a production. Not, I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
this, your assumption should be that it has anything to do with the reality. You should be just as incredulous when you're watching a movie.
Well, but
You
some of
know.
the value may be in even people who were aware of that, or
Mm.
maybe those, even if we could assume that there were some folks in America who had an understanding of that, or assumed that it was all essentially a fantasy land. But even with that knowledge, they would still, I think,
Yeah.
subconsciously feel that there's value in that, like it's just like like a I want to go into the mode of TV viewing, and that's somehow valuable. It's a way to spend their time or
Hmm.
something, but it's an American pastime, right?
Well,
So regardless of whether it's good or bad or real or fake, it's still TV, the famed. There it is, the boob tube, you
yeah,
know.
I think
So,
I guess the TV will compete with like, I think the education system and pharmaceuticals is the primary method of mind control in the United States.
and
Mass
it's
mind
interesting,
control, yeah.
I did some early when I was in my research into the media, I dug a lot into the radio industry publications. They were internal. I mean, I'm sure they were available to the public, but there would probably been very little interest. But it was specifically radio industry publications that were, there were two in particular, and I'm talking about during like the late 19, the teens into the 1920s, that time frame. And I can tell you that back then, and then of course into the 30s, but and I stopped there. But I would read quite a lot of this material, and there were some regular recurring themes, and a lot of that radio stuff. A lot of the executives involved, and some of the people involved in just the material that was being put out, what's being produced and broadcast by on radio, they had a lot of interest in the development of television.
Hmm.
And it took a long time, apparently. I had no idea how early TV was being developed and how it was seen as a development, like it was coming. And the radio, well, you can imagine how radio would be. It's like, wow, it comes with pictures, right? It's like radio with visuals.
Hmm.
Oh no! So obviously it was a threat, but I think it was seen as something. It was more of like just strategically, what are we going to do? How do we deal with this? And at the same time, I noticed there was a huge movement by the radio industry executives themselves, but obviously from outside influences as well. That there was, I guess it was even a phenomenon in the early days of radio that radio should be, at least some part of the day's broadcasts should be devoted to educational material. Had you ever heard that?
Oh yeah, in the broadcasting, it all goes into
Yeah.
licensing and all that, which is
It's, isn't that
which
weird?
in itself was a takeover in the licensing,
Well, see, this
Radio
is the
Control Act.
thing.
Yeah.
There's the whole like underlying power plays going on, and then also the just straight up corruption and people who are looking to make a buck, and they're going to do it one way or another. And if it means they have to push for educational programming on radio, then so be it.
Hmm.
But it was weird because they were also putting out surveys in communities and asking regular Americans, how much did they think they should, how much should be, and then they wound up testing some of it in markets, and it just bombed like crazy. Nobody wanted to hear anything about nobody wanted to be educated via radio. It just turned out to not really. Of course, the material was probably pretty poor, but
Yeah.
they wanted to like, they wanted to hear the music. They wanted to hear ridiculous bits, comedy bits, and all the stuff that the early days of
The
Hollywood
shadow. And, yeah.
Tinseltown. Yeah, the shadow. Well, that stuff as well, the dramatic stuff,
Yeah.
the kind of, but it was like the Harlequin romance version of what could be if you look at what has been achieved via radio and TV in the many years since then.
Yeah.
They've done a fair job. We could say that some of the stuff put out on PBS has been pretty decent. Of course, it's less so now, especially with Frontline. For example, I can't even watch a damn Frontline when it used to be before 9/11. It was actually a pretty damn good
Hmm.
program. But anyway, people at the time didn't care about it. So that shows you the world we're in. And I realized, you know what? I can't talk about this anymore. This is not going to work. I can't present that theory anymore and expect to get any kind of a positive reaction. So I switched things around. And I won't go into this in detail, but we may, if you're curious, toward the end, maybe I can just give an overview. But I decided against that, and I thought it might be better to attack this from a different angle. And I came up with a proposal for something that I'm kind of just vaguely referring to as an anti-propaganda smartphone app. So now what it is it's like they can choose to participate. It's not thrust upon them. We're not going to just cut the programming cable to everyone in one fell swoop and shut it all down. Although I still argue, my personal view is that whether people know it or not now, the end result of that is it would be seen as one of the most heroic acts ever. And also, people would be very surprised at how quickly it became, they became politically and socially motivated, and also very much so concerned about not only themselves but everyone else. It would be, I think, a real positive thing. Of course, the worst part of it would be when the media comes back online and starts trying to do their best to demonize these acts.
Oh, I mean, imagine the media faker at that point, and the false
Well,
and the false flags.
well, is that too? Yeah.
They would freeze up the banking system, and people would be blamed. They'd be blamed for the food lines and the riots and all that stuff.
Exactly. But I still think that it's like we're going to come to a point where some kind of, and I hate to use the term, but revolution, but a big change will come in America. It's inevitable. And it's maybe sooner than, because the financial, the health of our current financial gaming and scheming is really at a low point. It seems they may have run out of options or have very few. So that's going to be a turning point, and that may trigger massive change. And the way I see it is that I've been waiting for this change for far too long, and I think that it's one of those things we need to work this turkey through. Let's just get it over with, because the longer we wait, the worse the outcome in the end. Even though it may be very positive, it may not be as positive the more we wait. And also, we were just wasting our time, and a lot of things that we could be doing, we're not going to be doing because we're not past that turning point where that big change has occurred. And I think this whole media is turning the TV off. And you see people, you've probably seen this where it says, you've seen like the meme, kill your TV. Or, just the whole concept you'll see in various forms, art and in just politically motivated stuff. It'll basically tell you to turn off your television.
Yeah, but it's the big question is to what level. I think a lot of this, the media has media was weaponized.
Oh, yeah.
That's not even a dispute. But
Yeah.
I just don't mean it in terms of content. Go back to radio and music. You've heard of the 440 versus the 432 megahertz.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it. I don't
And
know how much of it is like, I mean, it seems
yeah,
pretty compelling.
yeah, and the 440 was put in because it's more disturbing,
Hmm.
whereas the 432 apparently is more calming, and it's more I think consistent with the cycle.
I think it's something deeper. If it is
Yeah.
true, if they did it intentionally, I think there's something more to it because I don't think it wouldn't be as worth their time and effort had it been about making it somehow more like discordant or disturbing
Yeah.
because they're obviously looking to sell the music. They want people to
Well,
like
no,
and
not so much.
appreciate.
That's more subtle than that. Again,
Yeah.
it's like the cell towers and
It
uh,
may have to do with your ability to think and
yeah.
to communicate. Like it's, I know they say that there are various effects on the brain from watching television,
Mhm.
and I imagine the same is true from listening to music. And therefore, if they were able to somehow create a universal wave pattern that would deliver it all
Mhm.
with a less or a more, depending upon what they're trying to do, I see it as a possibility. That's for sure. It's a
And
little weird.
it gets into also the issue when they started putting up these cell towers in the late '90s. The industry commissioned a study on the health effects,
Mm.
and they came back the health effects were terrible, and they just ignored the results. And this could be an issue of downstream profits because the people that own the cell companies are the same company that owns the medical system, so it's all interlinked.
Well, that's a big problem, and
Yeah.
and again, coming back to the propaganda. So so you saw what I was getting at is about taking. I figured, you know what? Why am I trying to sell this idea? I keep explaining it to people who I think are going to be favorable to it, and they wind up saying they don't see the value in doing it. They don't see that, even though it's something it could be done, and it certainly is a very and some will see it as a noble thing because, and even if they're like a little upset about missing their favorite program for a day or two, it's kind of like who cares, And I think they have to admit it to themselves. But overall, there's this underlying success of propaganda that's really evident because they all seemed, at least even subconsciously, very hesitant, very very some even opposed to the idea. But the subtle effect of that is really an example of the success of that propaganda. That's
Well,
what I would say for sure.
what's
It's
interesting
huge.
is if you look at all heroic acts, usually they're done in a they're that heroic acts are always illegal.
Yeah, they are. Are you? Wait a minute. Let me think about that. They're always illegal.
I mean,
You know what? That does seem like,
you
yeah,
think
it's
about it,
like,
right? I mean,
well,
it's
nowadays I would imagine
yeah,
so because I've seen people who are heroes and there's always a cop standing by who's talking on the phone with his girlfriend or something while the other guy runs and jumps in the creek and it's below zero to save the little girl or whatever the hell
yeah.
it is.
But the guy in the
Yeah.
New York subway that stopped that killer, and the cop just watched him until he
Well, and
was.
then, yeah, and then they get busted for some kind of
Yeah.
infraction, right? Where, well, that's, yeah, that's probably
I
true
mean, whether
to
it's the
extent.
Chinese student standing up to the Chinese tank,
Hmm.
whether it's the people trying to stick through the Berlin Wall, or whether it's Samistat and these publications that were illegal, whether it's the homeschooling movement, which was technically illegal when it got started, and people
Hmm.
just ignored the law. And I think what you're trying to get at is it's not so much you're not going to change the system through voting. And in fact, it might help it if you didn't vote, because the system would lose its legitimacy if only 10% came out and voted. The whole saying is "don't vote" it only encourages them, because
Yeah,
they can claim
that's true.
mandates for the people.
That's
But
right.
if not voting also coincided with sort of I would say sort of a political general strike, where just people didn't comply with dumb or oppressive laws anymore, they simply wouldn't have the manpower to enforce them.
I think that, yeah, but see, but
Yeah,
what I was getting at is that, yes, you've identified where I'm thinking.
yeah.
That's where I was coming at when I came up with
It's a
this
consciousness
idea.
issue.
But this is the thing.
Yeah,
When you look at society and you decide, okay, now how is it going to be received? How well is it going to spread? And will it become uh, a phenomenon and become a success to some extent? Can this work? Because we as individuals can't control the whole thing. And it's good that we can. It's important to try to give people tools to help themselves and also but here's the thing, it's about, I realized that, wait, this is too confrontational. It's like, for
yeah,
example, let's say with this Virginia shooting that's happened recently, a lot of people in my sphere, my circle of friends and the places and people I know, are saying that it's another staged event, and I would agree. It appears that way. It appears at least to be deceptive, and at least in some way, or some parts of it pre-planned, which really destroys the whole thing anyway. Because if we're told that it's a guy who shows up
yeah, yeah.
and kills these people and they did nothing to prevent it, well, then we're talking about it's definitely, if that's not the case and they had planned this, and so anyway,
What's
it's a
funny,
staged event.
funny about that story is we're not getting any details. The media doesn't investigate anything. They give it a narrative, and all they do is repeat the narrative by the authorities. It's all
It's
closed.
true.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
I want to know
exactly.
how this guy knew where they were going to be to shoot them if he was no longer an employee at the station. Now, a
There's
reporter
that
should
too.
find that out, because
Yes.
someone leak that
Yeah.
information to this person. If this is what
Yeah.
happened, I want to know why the Virginia State Troopers demanded that the BBC reporters delete the film they took of his alleged suicide.
Well, I'll tell you why, in
No,
my opinion. That's
no.
if you had to take a guess, it's because they all come from the same school of broadcasting, which is this is intelligence work, and that's not their business, right? They're doing something else. It's not journalism.
It
They
is the
have no
BBC
intent to.
after all. Yeah,
Well, and also I believe, as I understand it, hell, at least hats off to the BBC for being over here doing something. But I don't believe any of the major television networks anymore, at least, even have overseas bureaus anymore.
they have
They
green
just figured
screens.
that. They just figured forget it. Yeah, they've got that. Eventually, they won't even need to even leave their the comforts of their studios. Yes.
No,
Well, but that's what this is. But see, this is the thing, though, is that if we see, for instance, again, this is Virginia thing. You and I may be able to understand that there's something deceptive going on here. It's something's fishy, or that it's a totally fabricated, staged, and propagandizing type of event. But most Americans are not able to say that. They don't have there's no forum in which they feel that they can do that without having the backlash. Like, for instance, I can go out and, because of my experience after all this time doing it, of course I was different. It was different when I began to express these views. But nowadays I know how to take, some of these shills and some of these agents of change out there on the internet who engage in conversation via discussion threads or comment threads on YouTube videos are real good examples of this type of work. There's a really great forum that used to be, it's called something else now, but it was called, it was the James Randi Educational Foundation Forum. And that was the place you would go. It was like a boot camp for truthers who needed to work at getting better at dealing with these complete jerks who were doing nothing but trying to control the narrative and to suppress the truth and information. That's a really, I would advise people to be very cautious if they're ever going to go there. And I warn you, make sure you've had a full meal and you're strong. And if you go in and expect that you're going to find yourself disgusted and humiliated and all of that if you hang out at any length there. But that type of thing is what people get as a backlash. If you were to try to express that to your coworkers or at a family gathering or something, you're going to get that attitude. People will either disagree and get angry and it can start a shouting match, or it can just lead to you being isolated, or you get onto the internet and try to do it and you think it's okay, now I'm going to do it anonymously, but you're still going to be getting backlash. And it's about not just those who are paid to do such things that are causing all this backlash, but it's the greater, that propaganda that has really done such a great job of putting everyone into their place and giving us kind of the limits of debate and discussion so we can't go outside them. So I need to continue to think in terms of, well, what can we do that takes all of that into account? And that's like, for example, this anti-propaganda smartphone app. I realized, wow, if what this would do essentially, without going into the details, is it would eliminate really any kind of debate. It would eliminate the having to identify who you were. You could just press a button basically, and it would make a difference. So it would give somebody who was the most timid, but who had ideas like us kind of lurking, maybe it was kind of festering for a while in them, and they had yet to really have an opportunity to step forward and say, yeah, I think that's a fishy story too. And because they've had no forum, they haven't done it at all, but something like this or a similar type of device might give them a chance to come out of their shell. And then I think from there it would snowball into all kinds of things. And they may even become, brave enough to trudge out into the greater internet or into maybe even the broadcast news or independent news via different mediums that would really put them on the hot seat. I've been on the hot seat a few times, but I've never really felt like I was under a strong attack over any kind of prolonged duration. And I never feel that I've been, I think that just as an example here, a lot of people describe being sometimes even being stalked, or they've been threatened. And I think it's rare, but I do understand and have seen proof of it, and also think that it does exist and it does go on. And I also see some that are where their character is where they've essentially been besmirched and slandered or libeled very heavily, totally with fabricated information and done in a coordinated way. But with me,
especially with social media, you can create. I mean, if you have the resources and the knowledge, you can set people up. Because this social media information is not evidence, because there's no chain of custody. There's no real way to confirm anything is true, whether it's Twitter messages or emails, and all this stuff is subject to. And especially with the software having all this backdoor stuff that that they sold to the NSA and other whoever alphabet soup agencies or other private contracting companies have now, they can get in there and get administrative, control this thing. And whether it's Silk Road or your own Facebook account or your, they can put images on your computer.
Well, and I think they do this sometimes when they need to take someone down as a patsy or for whatever reason. But this is. But I was getting to the point that I personally have not had any kind of even moderate case of this happening to me. But I do think I understand why that may be. And I think in my case, what it is that, of course I get into it in just individual, kind of momentary come and go, hit and run type things. And people will also hit and run when they come across the material I produce. And sometimes it's even much, much later. They just decide, oh, okay, I'm going to come in and, do a little bit of damage here on this person's information, whether or not it's part of their explicit instructions or part of an organized effort or project. But one of the reasons I think I've avoided that is because of the way I came out in the first place. My blog was kind of not very popular. I did not really do anything, despite my understanding of the mechanism of promoting material and search engine optimization and all that on the internet. I still had yet to get to that point. I was still too busy writing the content and trying to just kind of put together something I thought would be a good blog at tyrannynews.com. And so it really wasn't exposed enough. So I wasn't on their radar. But then I did the YouTube channel and fairly quickly began to become someone who was appreciated. There were a lot of people who seemed to like the material I produced, and in the beginning especially, and very little backlash and very little disagreement and all of that. But it grew over time. And now I'm pushing about 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. But I in the same way, I have not done anything to grow that either. But what I find is that, and I saw some very, very reasonable discussions and debates in the comment threads on the videos. And so there's no like controversy or attacks really kind of taking place on my channel. And I think it's because from day one, I entered in a very professional way. I tried to just, for whatever reason, I'm not saying it was better or worse. It turns out, in retrospect, that it was a good idea because maintaining that professionalism and kind of having, and keeping it clean of material like videos that were just goofy or and resisting the urge to put out a video that might have been a bit biased, or it was, if I libeled someone else because I got offended by him or something, and not too politically motivated, but just keeping to the general theme. And over time, I realize over years now that I think that's what's prevented them from coming after me, is because they feel like there's just they don't see their avenue of approach. It's like their attack vector seems to be, not easily discernible. Whereas with other people, they can identify maybe a personal characteristic, or they can look back at the history of their blog or their channel on YouTube and see something that emerged, some kind of a battle they got into, or some kind of bias, or some kind of personal belief or value, or personal detail or something. And somehow they use that as the leverage, and that puts them, but it all comes down to you having to have some kind of impact as well. Obviously, as somebody who is not that popular in social media, I'm only now maybe just beginning to experience some of that. It's not very likely that they would drop everything or even assign too many resources to briefly come and try to, smear me, or to try to create some kind of a, campaign that argued against something, or maybe just to make a claim about me that would really, really ruin my credibility or something. I don't see that would be too likely now, but over time that might happen, and it's a big thing to deal with in social media. But it also points to how valuable and how much potential exists in this type of thing. And I've switched. No, I would say that social media, like looking at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all the other, there are so many now, and there are many that are very popular that I'm not even aware of, or that I've only heard about. But Reddit and LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, but some of these various social media platforms that are just emerging, and they're doing fairly well. Of course, you're not going to compete against a Facebook in this marketplace. It'd be like trying to compete against a Walmart for the very same reasons, I think, or very similar. But the thing
and Facebook was probably set up to be as big as it is anyway.
Well, that's what I mean. They entered the fray. I remember years ago going to Facebook, and the first thing I thought is, oh my Lord, this interface is horrifying. I can't stand it. It's just not very good. And I left. And then every time I've went back for any kind of just checking it out, I realized that, wow, they haven't done a damn thing. They just do not care. And it's because it's not about pleasing the audience. They know they've got they went ahead and just created my account on Facebook without my knowledge. And the only reason I became a Facebook subscriber or had an account was because for my blog, I wanted to have a Facebook
Mhm.
page to represent it. And my blog was not about me. So as Tyranny News Network, I went to Facebook to get a page there, and they said, no, 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 you're going to first have to create a personal account before you can do that. And you have to be your person. And I went, well, screw that. I just said, all right, well, I'll tell you what, my name is Derek Smithers, right? And I went in and just filled out the fields with a bunch of, nonsense. And boom, now I had my Tyranny News Network page. Well, so a year or two passes, and all of a sudden somebody sends me a link or something, and they're like, yeah, I messaged you or whatever on Facebook. And I was like, no, you didn't. And then they said, yeah, yeah. And they linked to it. And I went, and there I was. And it was me with my name, and it had my correct birthday and location. And there was already some friends and some interaction. Rather, at least they were posting things
Mhm.
to my stream. But I had never seen this thing, and it was not me. And literally, it was outside of my knowledge that this was created. So guess what? Then I tried to acquire it. I figured, you know what? That is a little. I had like my parents connected to this person, and I thought, okay, well, I guess maybe I ought to acquire it because no one else should be able to, right? If not me, then who? So I tried, and it takes at least 24 hours because they require one step to that requires it to happen the next day, and I don't know why that is, but there is. So it's a 2 day or at least an overnight process. But so I did all the things they asked me to do, and it failed. It would not, like I never got the final step, never would process or whatever. So I gave up for a while. Maybe a couple months later, when I thought I had some time, I went, okay, I'm going to try this again. And I tried again, failed again. So I just went, screw it, and gave up. So there's my experience with Facebook. And they're absolutely horrifying. But yes, that's because, that's the quality you get when it's like big government. If
Yeah.
big government's going to be really horrible. And so big Facebook type media platforms are also going to be
Mhm.
horrible. They're not built from the our interests up, and they're built top down in a sense. But what I've done recently is I've shifted and I've looked. I've thought, well, there's no way we're going to win in Facebook land, and there's no way we're going to win even in Google land now, as I understand the way Google has not just had made ruminations of this or that. They have now implemented apparently one of the more recent changes to their search engine uh, results policies is that they are now favoring content on blogs and other official sites that they deem to be accurate, more accurate. It's like it reminds me of Wikipedia,
Mhm.
which Wikipedia everyone thinks is some kind of wild west where you can present what you want, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, you sometimes it would be impossible for you. I remember one guy was saying, as an author of material himself, he wrote a fictional book in which a character had been based on some other person or figure in their life, and they were the ones who were the creator of this. Yet, when they went to their Facebook site or area that related to their book, and they found that it made some kind of a connection between this character and associated it with someone totally unknown to the person that was just wrong. So they went and signed up and tried to debate that, and they boom within minutes they reverted to the original, and they tried again, and boom they reverted to they could not get it to fix, and then finally after a number of inquiries into it, they were able to get in touch with, or rather present what their case was and get the answer back. And the answer back was that Wikipedia will not allow that to be posted because it is not confirmed in two industry recognized sites. It has to be published in two reputable sources. So the origins of a character in a fictional book that are created in the mind of a person out there can be just totally fabricated. Someone can just make up a story on Wikipedia, and that's the end of the line. I mean, if you make it up and if it's printed in two publications, that's all it takes. It doesn't have to be true, and the author has no say in that matter. So anyway, more information about how this is not always the best scenario. But I'm looking into this smartphone app, or just the app concept, because it's a layer that exists. It's like it's related to internet content. It's related to social media. All the main social media platforms have apps that run on these mobile devices. But if you consider that none of these mobile device apps have really become, let's see, they're not phenomenons like some of these other websites were in the time that just preceded the development of these apps. I think there's potential here where I don't think they're really protected, and I don't think they're doing much in the way of guarding against a phenomenon. And I think this is maybe where we need to look, because ultimately I think we're going to have the element of surprise, and to some extent. Some creativity is going to be necessary as well. That's why a lot of the stuff we produce now, or a lot of the ideas we're tossing around, involve humor. Whereas I resisted it. I knew the value, and I saw that it had worked at times, and we did a lot of consideration of things that were humorous, and but I resisted it ultimately for a long time, thinking that, well, it's still going to be better to just do our best job at presenting information about, what we're doing, or to try to help people to get the right information, to get across our message, whatever it is. And then now I would say I have finally given in and realized, you know what? Yeah, again, relating to that effective propaganda being so strong that and so effective and so ubiquitous in our world and in all the things we do, it just seems like I maybe didn't really see the enormity of it and realize now that we're going to have to work around it or work with it somehow, at least for a time.
Well, they say humor is one way to tell the truth without getting killed. So
I love it. That is so funny. That is exactly the type of thing that, had I been hearing stuff like that earlier, it's like, hey, where was that when I needed it? Because that's exactly the type of message I needed to hear, because it was a while before I realized it. This is where well, I'll tell you one thing. You may not know this, and I have not done an episode in a long time. But one of the offshoots of, and I told people this before, and I don't think nobody got it. And I kept trying to sell it as, you're going to love this. This is going to be great. But I have a channel called Cop on Cops. Okay? And what it is I've got this character, and the character is Officer Steve Poppet of the New York PD in the Orwell district, by the way. But he's a puppet. And through the puppet, I interact with various news stories, and eventually the intent was then to go and actually go into the real world of policing and go on ride-alongs and that kind of stuff. But I realized over time, after I've done a few episodes, that the difficulty in doing the filming alone is the hard part, because the puppet it's like the cameraman or camera person would have to literally be affixed to me, like hugging me at all times in order to get that shot, because without having me in the shot. But I've done a number of episodes, I think maybe 6 now, and it's Cop on Cops. I would check it out. You'll find Cop on Cops on YouTube as well. It's very funny. I think people will enjoy it. But it also is very pointed. There's a definite message underlying it, and that is police corruption and ultimately the crimes of state, which is, very much what obviously we've talked a lot about tonight. But from just looking at the police corruption aspect, I figure I've always wanted to do something about that. And I really admire some of Cop Block and some of these Cop Watch, some of these organizations, or what's his name? Jose, is it from Photography's Not a Crime?
Oh, down in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really heroic thing, in my opinion. Yeah, as you mentioned,
it
takes illegal. Yeah,
it takes physical courage.
Well, and he has been roughed up a number. And I mean, I figure that that's probably maybe a potential in my future. But I think doing it with the puppet, again, this is another. It's the humor. Mm-hmm. It's, here I am with a puppet. I can go out and I could probably say just about it. So I cannot wait I don't want to be mean spirited about it. but I do want to try to get to a point where I have the capability in terms of the production abilities to be able to maybe go out and conduct interviews of police chiefs about events that have occurred, or go on ride-alongs,
Hmm.
be present like an episode of Cops or something, staying out of the way, but being there for an arrest or something, reporting as the puppet, Officer Steve Poppin. Because I figured that it would be very tough to imagine that they would rough me up as I'm walking around with this puppet thing. Do you know what I mean? It would look really bad. If anything, if they captured it on video, it'd be like, why are they beating up that puppeteer? You know what I mean? Just another angle of approach, and creativity again is part of that. It's not just humor; it's also the creativity. Some of
Hmm.
the stuff I've done, and you may have noticed, like in the video you watched the other night. I would argue that a lot of that is kind of even abstract in a sense. Some of the material I put out is not. It's not very academic per se. It's even maybe artistic.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to go too far, but like when I try to, it's somehow the way my mind works. I'm not very cogent oftentimes when I'm trying to explain something. And sometimes the concept is just difficult to put into words, or it's just not easy for me to get across. But I can do so maybe sometimes, and I think it's sometimes been proven to be the case, if I present it in a more abstract way or in an almost artistic way, where it's about the creativity and going with that, as opposed to trying to fight that and going completely strictly academic. And I will always have people argue. I mean, there are people who think that everything I put out on YouTube that is in a documentary type fashion it should have footnotes, like some type of book I've authored on a topic, like
Yeah.
I'm the expert on something, and it needs to have everything footnoted, where I literally state the source of all the information. And they totally miss the point that, you know what, nobody does that. You won't find any program. They don't do that on Frontline, do they? So why the hell am I to be held to that standard? But that's always going to be the case. Some people will never get the point, but then others are. Oh, there's so many great people who have reached out to me to tell me that something I've produced in one of the videos I've done, or in a number of them, who are the more long-term fans, have said some great things, and they've said that I've helped them view things in a different way. And I try to kind of try different things at times. I'm not always successful. Obviously, the cop on cops, the puppet thing. I mean, it's out there, and it's always been a challenge. And the reason that I have not done one in a while is I haven't been inspired to do one.
Hmm.
Whereas before, and the very first one I did was on the topic of Sandy Hook, by the way. I think you might want to watch that one.
Yeah.
If
Check
any,
that out.
it is kind of funny,
Have
actually.
everyone yell at you for having to change their reviews? Get mad at you?
Oh,
You've destroyed my paradigm, man. How dare you?
oh God! Well, my own father, I kind of predicted it might happen with my dad when it came to Dave McGowan's book, Strange Scenes Inside the Canyon,
Oh, okay.
because of the way it deconstructed the hippie 1960s, the free love and the music,
Yeah,
a
it's
lot
very
of the
difficult
music.
to. Yeah.
And so, really, even though it really is, I don't want to give the impression to those who may not have read this or may not be aware of this. It's not that it totally deconstructs it all and makes them all into either evil people or agents of various intelligence agencies or something. It doesn't do that explicitly, but what it does do is it gives you, in some cases, that does happen, but in others, it just puts things into a much broader perspective, and you realize how maybe a lot of what happened in the '60s was not necessarily something born of the moment and of the movement that was occurring. It was a lot of it was being guided by the hidden hand.
Yeah, it wasn't spontaneous.
Well, and some of
Yeah.
the stuff was straight out like, when I've talked about with people about the Grateful Dead, how the ability to get acid at these concerts. I mean, there's no doubt in many instances it was like, I think maybe they even had to make hey, they had to call the CIA at the last minute. We can't. Our people aren't here. Can you get us some acid? You know.
It was
And
Owsley Stanley or Stanley Owsley or something. Yeah.
well, there's that person as well. I can't remember exactly what they were. Somehow, yeah, it was like somebody who was involved in the production or the putting on of the concerts of Grateful Dead, and yet you find out they're also some kind of
It's part of the Mellon Hitchcock fortune too. Yeah,
yeah, and so
the mansion.
there's all of that.
Yeah.
Plus, also some of these Grateful Dead people have said in recent years that hey, well, I'm actually very proud of being a member of the CFR, or rather, in one case, a gentleman said, yes, I've been to the Bilderberg, or rather, I'm sorry, to
Bohemian Grove.
Bohemian Grove,
Yeah.
and that they loved, and I think to myself, okay, that right there says it all. And others have, like, I know Zachariah Sitchin, no, gosh, is that who it is? No, I can't remember the gentleman's name. But anyway, he's a big, this guy, he's very esoteric. He also has a lot of, he tries to expose some of what's going on. Be like a Timothy Leary was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Timothy Leary even.
Yeah, well.
Has come right out and said, and, they tell stories about that didn't make sense maybe to some people, but they bought it. And now in retrospect, they probably think, well, that was pretty foolish of me. Because it just seems like what they were trying to do is cover up some kind of issue that would have exposed that Timothy Leary is not necessarily doing things all on the up and up, and that he had connections to government and to authorities and the ruling class and all of that.
Yeah, they wanted to go back to Gordon Wasson, J.P. Morgan, CIA, and
Yeah.
these I guess the Macy Foundation and all these the great foundations are involved in all types of social experimentation. That was music, culture, education. I mean, anything from feminism to gay rights to all this. It's about divide and conquer and sowing confusion. I mean, why would the CIA fund Ms. Magazine and Modern Art and
Oh, modern art. That just, I got to tell you,
pulp.
I feel like I want to do a video on this because
Yeah.
it wasn't long ago I went out, it was on a little, like a kind of a larger, almost like a family reunion, but we did a little vacation and this time it was New York was the scene. So I went to New York and I figured why not? I went and checked out the Museum of Modern Art. And I went in and filmed a few. Now there were a couple things I went there to see in particular. One was this thing I read that it was just like intense, and this kind of goes against the concept that these people were. A lot of this art was just a bunch of fluffy nonsense crap. That was like a Kandinsky or something that had some merit, but it was also simply kind of a project, part of a project where we need artists to fill the slot. And so some of this stuff wasn't so fantastic, but they tell it like it is. And modern art is so wonderful, but not, a good half of it is funded by CIA, and we don't really, I don't think we could actually say that it's been judged fairly. It's been given kind of a free ride. But one of the images I went to see was by Francis Bacon, and I'll tell you, it was frightening to see it in person. It was exactly as described. It became alive. It was this huge thing. It's got meat hanging from hooks. It's an ugly thing. I can't recall the name. But if anyone goes and make sure you go to look at the art, Francis Bacon, a couple of these massive paintings he's done. They're frightening. And you know what? Afterward, I went on the internet to try to find a picture of it so I could show someone. And I was stunned to find that there were hundreds of examples, but none of them actually captured what I saw when I was in the presence of it. So there's something going on with that. But yes, I was thinking about doing a video that revealed some of this, what the origins of modern art in America, especially, and the Museum of Modern Art, as I understand, was largely funded by these.
It was Rockefeller, wasn't it?
The
Gabby
Rockefeller
Rockefeller
and intelligence agencies,
Yeah.
or through these, like you've got Q, what is it? Some InQtel or whatever the hell it is.
Oh, yeah, that's
the front organizations,
Yeah.
private, these funding.
Yeah, they're the ones that funded Facebook.
Oh yeah, well, there you go. And I think to an extent they funded either Google or
Google,
well, I know. Yeah, some of these, and some of the stuff they deny or they say it wasn't as important. But yeah, there's no doubt that. And so you got to wonder. Facebook makes sense. Nobody has to wonder very long why they would want to fund Facebook, because it's an intelligence gathering apparatus and it connects us to, for God's sakes, it's like we dossier ourselves on Facebook.
Have you gotten into the whole idea of the personal computer? How some people treat it, and one dimension is a revolutionary tool because we're having this conversation right now on a personal computer.
Yes.
But the people that went into creating, people like Stuart Brandt, we're all involved in transhumanism, and the people behind it. It's all about creating the perfect surveillance society. So there's this
It's
long-term plan.
Well, you
You know,
know that it was true when you think about what they were, or even before the internet, they were probably at times sitting around wondering, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could have everyone on a never-ending phone call? So
yep.
it's like we could just, and essentially that's the internet, We're on all the time. It's never off. So there's data is transiting at all times, and they can tap into that
And that's
and
the Internet of
consume it.
Things.
It
Where
is, yeah.
everything is monitored and it's all sold you by convenience and economy,
Oh.
and even the device itself becomes flashy and sexier as the iPhone. It also becomes incorporated in your body. That's where you get this whole weird idea of the fusion of machine and man. And
Oh, I'll tell you, I have a theory about something that relates to this. It's very frightening, and I hope it's not true, and I don't have enough evidence to prove that it is. But there is some evidence out there that, and if you kind of put two and two together, or two and four and six, or whatever, you can find that you may come to the theory I have about there being some kind of a software application or a network of some kind, and it would be kind of like the only example I could ever come up with to think of what this thing is like would be like what that Promise software was. You remember hearing about that?
yeah, there was the
That
Hamiltons,
yeah.
and that involved the octopus and the
Yeah, what was the octopus? Yeah, there's
yeah,
always that
and
issue.
the reporter
Yeah,
found in West
gosh,
Virginia.
yeah, yeah. They found dead in the tub in his hotel room.
Mm.
Well, and the reason I say this particular software reminds me of what this is, or is kind of akin to what I think has developed over time. And it may
Inslaw, right?
Inslaw, there you
Yeah,
go. That's the company that they stole. I think that was the State Department stole the software from them, and
had the back doors. Yeah,
I think they still, to far as I know, there hasn't it never ended. There's still ongoing legal battles over that. They just keep kind of dibbling and dabbling in it over time, and they never really resolve the issue. And of course, they never ultimately will resolve it, as in, you win, the State Department loses, here's your $1 trillion,
yeah.
and we're going to put all of our people in jail who had anything to do with this. That's not going to happen. But anyway, that software Promise, which is a prosecutorial evidence and case management software, and right away, it's like, oh, wow. So, in other words, that was at a time when you think about what evidence is in crimes. We've got blood, we've got fingerprint evidence, blood stains. They used to have to take this evidence physically. If they didn't just have photographs of it, they would take the evidence physically, put it into boxes, and it would go into storage and all that. And it would be cataloged. People would describe it. And oftentimes it was handwritten reports written that described these various and they would tag everything. And it was a very inefficient system. I mean, admittedly, and it was limited in that this was pre-computing era and all that. Well, that's what this software kind of did, was address some of those issues. And it was, I think, the beginning of a very nasty turn of events that has led us to a really a bad position with the way evidence is, what constitutes evidence now. It's just as virtual as any kind of online virtual gaming thing or whatever, because once it becomes, bits and bytes on the internet, or in a database somewhere, it's now not necessarily what it originally was. But that's been the case with a lot of things. Photographs are not always seen as, they stage and manipulate photographs all the time now. They do it every day in the advertising world and stuff. But it's also now making its way into evidence. But I think what they have now may be a software that's based on that's like probably the most interconnected with live networks that provides all the data and all the live media content and archive media content that one could imagine. So, and you can figure there's nothing that prevents. Let's just assume the CIA has it's no holds barred. It's there's no authority. There's nothing that holds them accountable. They can do what they want, and in a sense, I imagine that could be true, or that it's largely true. So I think that the CIA would be a perfect example of an agency where, at least at some level of security clearance, I think, which is kind of I think the security clearance may govern how you would access the system or who has access to it. But ultimately, at the top end, it would have access to everything. And that would be like assimilating all the data in all of the libraries, all of the data in all of these criminal cases. So all the evidence that's now digitized in the form of video or photos or audio recordings, all the phone conversations. How about the live feed of all the phone conversations going on in America at that present time? Or how about that where now they have those overhead. They've got both little drones and blimps and satellites that are able to in some cases I believe they have explained, and I don't know if it's true, but at least officially they said yes, we can view an intersection in a major metropolitan area, and in which everyone is stopped at a four-way intersection, and we know who every individual is in every one of those cars all
Uh,
the time.
well, that's because the cars are now.
Well,
Uh,
and it's not
yeah,
just the cars, it's the fact that every point in time leading up to that has been cataloged, and if there's ever an error, or if they feel like they're not certain, then that gets the focused attention, and then when it's certain, boop, it pops in, and it looks for verifying. Well, and when you pass through an intersection, it's reading the license plate numbers,
yeah, that's what
all
they've
of
done.
this.
They equip police with automatic license plate readers. Well, no one brought this before the public, by the way. It was made. A decision was taken administratively.
Yes, I remember hearing about that not
Oh,
long back, and I thought, but it didn't surprise me, and I wasn't surprised even to hear about the cars that drive themselves and all, they're going to be hackable and all that.
yeah.
I thought there's no way in hell. Like I know my car, I have a 2004 Taurus, Ford Taurus, which I keep in very great condition because I figure, I like keeping it. It's a 2004. As I understand it, it's 2005 and forward
Yeah,
when we begin to have the big issues where every car, I think from that point forward, is going to have a cellular transmission capability. And
yeah.
whether it's identified as being a feature on the car or not, or if it's part of OnStar or advertised in any way, really isn't the issue. But so I think this software, as I continue to add pieces to it, imagining that, oh yeah, sure, that wouldn't be a problem if they could add that too. I eventually get to a point where it's as corrupt as you can imagine. It has everything you need, and it's live. And so, and of course, then, and all that stuff that's your private information, it's not private. We know that. They're supposed to. Oh gosh, what are they called? They have the FISA court and all this. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, give me a break. How deep into this are they? And I think at the top, if it's secure enough, and I think ultimately they may only have so many projects where they are the dominant force of the technology. In other words, the state, the government, the intelligence agencies, and the secret black project stuff. I would imagine that the industries out there in the public sphere are really hold the majority of the best technology. And the truth is that only so much, I think, can be done inside the government by these other officials because they're not motivated by their own injury. It's not like they're tinkering in their garage in that
Mhm.
case. That's the difference, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But what they do is they acquire everything with a reckless abandon, and there's no limit to where they can just shut you down. And what can be patented is totally controlled, and so they basically can, and they can also be very secretive and use authority to mandate that things be secret and therefore not disclosable for any reason. So they have only so much, and they only maybe have so many successes in the way of their, like for instance, in the area of technology, software development especially. I think that there's a likelihood that something like, what I heard as a rumor related to Aaron Schwartz. Remember him, the activist?
Yeah, who supposedly hung himself. Yeah.
That's right. Supposedly hung himself, and his whole claim to fame is he had started a couple of groups that were very successful at protesting. These were, like grassroots types things, if there is such a thing. But they were protesting some of these PIPA and SOPA acts that were
Hmm.
coming around, and he was actually responsible for preventing one of these from going through one year, and it required them to go through the following year. And so they trumped up some crazy charge on him, claiming that he had hacked into the JSTOR database, I believe it's called, which is just an online academic database that you can pay a subscription fee to and be a member of. Or in some cases, you have a membership depending upon if you're attending a university or something. So you can get essentially a complimentary, and it's an all-you-can-eat thing. So once you pay your monthly fee and you have access, you can get everything in the JSTOR database. So here's a guy who's super internet savvy. I think he also had some involvement in internet technology development too. So he did something that may have preceded this, but so the government decides they're going to trump up a charge on the guy, and they busted him for hacking into the JSTOR database and downloading the entire thing, and then putting it up, offering it up for free, or rather maybe that didn't even go that far because they're just accessing the material and downloading it all. Well, when I looked into that, I realized that, first of all, that doesn't even make any sense at all because I believe he had free access. First of all, he had free access to it ultimately without a problem. And the reason, how they determined that he had hacked into this is that they had him on surveillance camera, I believe at MIT, going into one of the computer rooms itself and taking his laptop and literally connecting his laptop to one of these mainframe or one of these machines in their server room. And that's how he transferred the information. So in other words, the guy didn't do as most people might do who had a half a brain, log in with his known and free account to JSTOR and via some kind of scraping software, just begin the remote download of everything from the comfort of his home or his office. And so instead of doing that, he went and physically went into the server room to do this. And I realized at that point that then this makes no sense at all. And what we're talking about now is we got a guy who's going in there and hooking up to one of the servers at MIT. What is he trying to access? And it ain't JSTOR. And this got me thinking about this software. And a rumor, or rather something I read on the internet, described how they think that what happened was that he was looking into institutional pedophilia, for instance, as one, and amongst
he ran into the octopus.
He may have run into the octopus,
like Danny Casolaro.
And the thing is what that includes, I think, is this software I've described, where it's but the meat of it, and it doesn't require that. What happened with Schwartz, I think, as a couple people have described, and I've come across this, and it seems pretty like there's limited information, but they've done a lot of the research, and it was clear that they had done a lot of this work. They had made calls, they had talked to people who knew him and family and stuff. And they suspect that he was looking into institutional pedophilia specifically, and that he had accessed a database of films, like pedophilia-related, images of children being abused, films of children being abused, maybe even the perps, and maybe even snuff films, that type of level, which I've heard people describe as being it's never happened. And it's like, okay, fine. I don't care. All I'm going to say is that, look, if there's a chance, I think we should go ahead and take a look into this, Well,
that was one of the theories behind Son of Sam, was they were making snuff films.
Mm-hmm.
This also factors into the Franklin scandal, and Gary Caradori, the investigator that was hired by the legislature, I guess John DeCamp.
Oh yeah.
And his plane blew up in midair after he supposedly got a hold of photographs.
Oh, that's right. He had it like in his briefcase. He was in possession of these actual physical photographs. Again, it's a reflection on the times versus. So this is likely, in other words, he might have done something differently today.
Yeah.
Right. With those photos.
The technology is different. So now now it could be, what if you get a
they got to kill you some other way now.
Because a lot of this stuff is done for blackmail, pedophilia. It's not just, it's not just satanic ritual. It's blackmail. That involves intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
And so, so if you
not all, sometimes it's individuals too. I hate to say it, but I think we've got more going on there. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the Franklin scandal thing. I think that may have begun as just a very successful private enterprise, a smaller scale thing that wound up earning the clientele that eventually grew to encompass. In other words, this was not an intelligence operation from the get-go, I don't think, but it may have been.
Yeah, well, I think they can pick up. That's the same thing with the DC Madam. where her operation wasn't shut. She didn't get arrested until she shut down her operation because the FBI was actively using it as a well, what I would refer was a blackmail operation.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they didn't get on her case, so she shut it down. And she didn't live in D.C. She lived in California.
I would love to
Yeah,
know about whether she had any
yeah,
information. See, now we're not going to know, but I know that I've heard that some of these government, like when government, workers travel, they get their stipend or whatever, and they
yeah.
have these they make travel arrangements. They usually stay at certain facilities and
Hmm.
hotel chains and stuff. And I have heard that certain of these hotel chains some of these more popular, the ones that they traffic the most, that they've rigged them all.
Oh
All
yeah,
the rooms are
oh
rigged.
yeah. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I heard someone say that the 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 expensive suites at some of the fine hotels are all geared for audio visual for business executives, politicians, and all that.
And you
Yeah.
can imagine how then if this was just and if you are a government employee and they mandate this is where you're going to stay, and
Hmm.
so you're basically just capturing everyone and anything that happens if it's to their benefit, they'll now have it. And that may, learning about how, well, I heard this too. This is another thing. This is a quote from a guy uh, from a book by Peter Gallison, and it's called Removing Knowledge. And he said, quote, and I have it here because it was in my letter, my email here I was referring to earlier. He said about 5 times as many pages are being added to the classified universe than are being brought to the storehouses of human learning, including all the books and journals on any subject in any language collected in the largest repositories in the planet. So in other words, 5 times the material that is published publicly, that enters the public sphere, is classified. So that's a huge. Now imagine and then I've also heard about some of the surveillance, like that I mentioned the overhead in the example of the where every car at an intersection they
Hmm.
were able to identify. Well, these are being filmed in real time in high definition. So it's not just that they can tune in and move the camera over. No, it captures the entire picture, the entire map, every area down to the most finite resolution. The whole thing is being filmed all the time, 24/7. And it almost makes me feel like you could lose yourself if you had access to that. I personally would probably be so fascinated by it, I would get immersed in it and I would be out of time and place very quickly
Hmm.
because you wouldn't, you can go back in time and be watching it all in real time. So if you watch someone do something that was odd, and then they somehow tucked around, got in a car and took off driving, and this was a recording that you're watching that occurred a week earlier, you could actually then watch it real time play out for the full week until the present. Of course, then it'd be a week later.
Hmm.
By the time you would never catch up, there'd be no way. But if you think about the amount of data, it's something, and I think that system they described with one city being viewed by one system that captures all of this at this kind of resolution and detail was something like 9 petabits a day or something. But it actually is a lot of video material, and they're storing it and keeping it indefinitely. And so adding up over time, and then imagining that there was a software that could be accessed via some kind of level of the internet, somehow you could. And I've heard various things that maybe one access means that allows you to ensure security has to do with the something that's about like those cable systems in Britain like Sky TV. I believe some of
Hmm.
their little cable boxes require a smart card, and it's that smart card and that cable system that there is a level of security there that somehow is heightened, and it may be that type of thing that allows you to then access it. And also then it's very interesting in the way it would actually transmit the information. But if you could access all of that remotely from wherever you are, it would be absolutely horrifying to imagine. Now, I think it's not overly, I don't think it's used to any extent like it's some kind of tool of every, you know, like every cop in every city and I don't think any of that would be true because I know they still have to sometimes even in high profile cases, they sometimes have to at least keep up the appearance that they're not
Yeah,
spying
yeah.
on everyone all the time. And so, but that's also kind of a screwy because sometimes it feels like, well, that's good, but then you realize that in court, they all they have to do is go in a back room, and go hush, 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 and whisper, and the
Yeah.
next thing you know, because they know the information, they have. They don't have to wonder. It's not like a guessing game where they're like, gee, I wish we could prosecute this guy if we only knew where he was on Tuesday when he was in his private whatever. Well, they do know, but they don't have to tell that, but it helps them to be able to form their case. Well, that's the problem we have there. But I still think, like I say, that it's not this octopus. I think it's not something that is accessed by everyone. I think it's one of these more private things. But like Aaron Schwartz, I think he met his end because, yeah, I would almost guarantee that he did not kill himself.
Well, he was a young man, and his
Oh,
case wasn't, I mean, a done deal. I mean, and if he did run into something like that, it would make all the sense in the world to get rid of him because,
oh, I heard that
yeah,
he had already. He had actually won. He had tried to plea. He went ahead and plea bargained,
hmm
and they had given him. It had actually gone through. He had it is documented that his plea bargain was accepted, and it was like no time. He would have to serve no time, and it was a 12-month. Oh, he would just had to be
made no
supervised for
sense.
12 months. Yeah, it was like he didn't. In other words, there was no possible way, nothing financially that would have been a problem, and certainly it was not the fear or the dread of having to be imprisoned for life or something. There's nothing at all like that. He didn't have to do any time.
But the chilling effect there, I think, is what is probably most valuable to them because there's only so many people with his ingenuity and entrepreneurship and brains. So if
Yeah.
you take out a few people and send a message out, hey, if you cause us trouble, this is what it is they're not really concerned with people who criticize the system. They're concerned with people whose criticism matters.
Well, see, that's the thing is you see what I'm
you know,
getting at is that
yeah,
I see what happened, I think, and it was
mm,
that because of his really successful political activism, that the formation of those protest groups that shut down PIPA and SOPA and so forth. Because of that, he was on the list. They were now watching him. And then at some point in time, to their great luck, I guess, they observed, hey, here he is accessing them, an MIT server. He's broken into the. I think that may have occurred, actually. And of course, I know that at times, but they did specify that they had him on closed circuit,
hmm
that he was in there and he did connect to the server in there. And that they claimed, and of course, that he had no reason or right to be there. And then they said the made up story again. This would be part of the narrative that helped them to kind of form this, I think. But and this was not necessarily, again, this is all rumor, a lot of this. It's not proven to be true, and we don't know what they would have done. But it appears as if had he carried on, if somehow he was able to avoid uh, being put down by these guys somehow, then it may have turned into something bigger. But I think that that was where the problem arose for him, is when he was being watched. Then he did something that he thought he could do, could get away with, which was to try to maybe tap right into an MIT server and get some of this get some of this video evidence firsthand, which was somehow not possible remotely, despite all the ability he had and the tech, some of the help
yeah.
he would have had, the technical help. They couldn't do it.
That was
That
probably where I had to get in
physically.
there. Yeah.
Well, and think about this. This is MIT. This is an MIT server room, and if in fact this was video material of child abuse being stored there, for what purpose? And what the hell is going on? And it indicates MIT may be a hub of this type of material, or where this software may interlink to be able to provide this type of just total, what is it, total information
Yeah.
awareness, right?
Panopticon.
Absolutely.
You know,
And
so.
it's so much worse than the 1984, I'll tell you, but it's okay because I think that humanity is so much more than they. Well, one example I'll give, and hopefully people understand this, but when I hear about the claim that the artificial intelligence, which is to try to simulate the human mind, and I don't say brain, I say mind intentionally, but they keep making this claim that they're really close to achieving artificial intelligence on par with the human mind, right? And my theory is that it's not. That's simply impossible. It's not even achievable. Okay, that's personal. That's my personal view. I would
Yeah.
argue that I can make arguments that would support that, but and others will disagree, and I don't deny that it's very possible I'm wrong about that. But I'll tell you one thing: it's going to be very hard to convince me that, let's say, okay, maybe they could achieve it, but how close are they now? I mean, I'm still thinking that we are not. No.
Oh
And so
yeah,
when I
I
hear
want
about,
to I want to hear a computer tell a joke, make up a joke.
oh my, see, and that's just the beginning. It gets worse from there.
I know.
I think it's a sham. I think these people are just extorting money for their scams. It's like,
Well,
what's
isn't
this
that isn't that
Ferris wheel, right?
isn't that what alchemy has always been though?
I think it is. Yeah, it's
It's
like
been a
it is a trick. It's a magician's trick in which
magician's
they.
trick.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like when I saw that whatever the one film was where they revealed how the magic really worked, where one guy he would go into one box and then boom, immediately appear in the next box, and the whole thing was is that he had a freaking double, and he
Yeah.
just looked identical, and but he was done so well, and with such bravado. I guess when he emerged, he did such a good job of appearing. Of course, it's not the same guy; it's his twin essentially. And then what happened though is the guy got injured. He got a hand. He lost like three fingers in a machine or something, and immediately it was a big. You could see the dread on the other guy's face because he had to stay in the shadows all the time, but he was required as part of that act. And
Hmm.
so he had to go and cut his fingers off and to be the same guy. And it was one of these more famous films of maybe the past 10 years. I can't remember which
Was it
one.
the Prestige?
It was something. I don't think it was a Prestige, but it may have been. Or if it was, if it wasn't that one, it was one of these other very
Yeah.
similar ones that emerged around the same time. But yeah. So it shows how, yeah, it's a parlor trick.
Well, I
And
mean,
yet, it's money though. I mean, this is parlor tricks that ruin entire nations
yeah,
or
yeah.
that. These are the deaths of. But the thing is how it connected to that are these people, and how did they even get? Then we get into the area of the esoteric nature of things and whether we're dealing with a battle of good versus evil. And I wouldn't doubt that that's true, but it may actually be a mixture of things. And it's very hard to say. I'm very afraid about a lot of the stuff we're going to find out, in a sense, but only because of it's just natural to be. Because I have an understanding, I think, as you may, of the well, you probably certainly do though, of like how I guess what the possibilities are. They're just really it's limitless. And so when we think about what could be revealed as having occurred over all this time, what may be the hell, I just saw today. I cannot believe it. It was very amazing. I'd never really thought to check myself, but somebody who was arguing a flat earth theory. And it wasn't something that I clicked on this video not because it was flat earth. It was something about an observance using a celestial sphere type lens or something. I just found it interesting. It looked like a way to film the whole sky in one shot. And I
Hmm.
thought, that's neat. I'll go check it out. I watched, and 3 minutes in, he begins by showing you that the sun, when passing overhead and then descending, on the other, in one half of the scene toward the sunset,
Hmm.
you can actually measure the sun and then wait a few hours and measure it again as it gets closer to the horizon. And he did, and it was like 30% smaller. And I was thinking to myself, there's nothing that can account for that. In the way the sun is too far away. It simply cannot be smaller because the
Hmm.
Earth rotates. It's not possible. So what the hell is going on here? And that was astounding to see. And I thought, boy, and it was a 2 hour long video. I ended it there and sent it as a quick Google Plus post asking, is this possible? Because it was so obvious. And also, and then he said, you know what? And it exactly correlates to the railroad line perspective ratio that, like in an artist's
Hmm.
recreation of correct perspective. He said it's exactly dead on. Thinking, and for example, if in fact the sun were not that far away and were merely kind of a projection on a half dome thing or something, which would then maybe that would account for it. Now I would understand why the sun was smaller by 30%.
Hmm.
Doesn't make any sense, but hey, we have to start thinking outside of the box and understanding that we never know. There's going to be some surprises in the corner. What do you think about the 23rd of September coming up?
Oh, that supposed what's that word again? The
Oh, yes, the Shemitah,
The
right?
Shemitah, that's what it is.
Yes, there's that, which is it's too
Is that what
much.
you're talking about?
Well, it's not just that. No, I mean, it's actually, there is apparently in all kinds of, well, more modern examples, there are apparent references to that date. But then also, there's stuff going back in some esoteric text and religious texts that also refer to this September 23rd of this year. I don't recall which exactly, but there are just a lot of references to it. And also in recent time, just in the past few months, I've noticed a major uptick in concern about that specific day, and then also about just the end of this month in general. And also, I noted that I believe it was just kind of a byline, not a very important news matter, but it had to do with the something in our finances as well. Like there
Oh,
was the Fed announced something like, "I think we're going to be okay starting October." Like we'll know or something in October. Meaning, whatever it is that's going to happen, they feel that it's going to be revelatory, and it will obviously be happening sometime leading up to October. So whatever that is, I have no idea. But yes, the 23rd, the Shemitah, it's we've got some people in our group in IMS, and without going into the specifics, because we want to try to keep some of this stuff close to the vest here, I guess, or whatever. But it's interesting how when you look at Sandy Hook and then you get off on a thread, you eventually have to decide: do I continue or do I turn and go back? It's like taking a wrong turn. If you take a wrong turn and keep going and deny that you've taken the wrong turn, the more denial
yeah.
that goes on, the longer it is before you realize, and then you realize all that time has been wasted. And so we have to do a lot of gauging of when to turn around and go back. So we go back all the time, but some of this stuff it feels like it goes and goes. And some of these threads we followed do appear to continue and appear also then to make sense when linked back to Sandy Hook. And a couple of them have to do with I guess you could call it Reform Judaism, is what it is. I think technically that is how it's referred to outside of, let's say, the rabbin.
Sabbatean.
I don't know if it is or not. It's actually more or less a new thing that's emerged. Reform Judaism, I believe, is new, and it's about taking some of the aspects of what you would find in certain branches of Judaism that relate to things happening in Israel, like the whole concept of every 7 years you have to let the land rest, essentially. And during that time, you're only allowed to just kind of groom and manicure to just upkeep so that you don't lose it all. But the land needs to rest. You cannot grow a new harvest that year and all that. And it so happens to be, this is the seventh year. And so on the Shemitah, which is somehow the day in which that begins, actually, is this 23rd. So the beginning of the seventh year where things must rest. Well, there's a lot of that stuff going on. And by the way, it's somehow this Reform Judaism thing where that has been taken outside of Israel into the greater world, and it's now being practiced in various aspects of the Jewish community outside of Israel. So it's really kind of not true to anything scriptural or any of that. And I think they admit that. But it's blended with a lot of environmentalism stuff. And so, and it's like they were able to now create kind of like, they have the kibbutz in Israel, and people would have to go there. Well, now they can do it outside, and they tie it in all together with this Reformed Judaism. It does a lot of that type of thing outside. And so they do it in the communities here in America. And Connecticut is one of these hubs where they have a lot of activity and a lot of things happening there, and a lot of people, place, and the connections also to China. There's a whole heck of a lot of connections to China, which I can't make it. Did you know on the day of the Sandy Hook shooting that the local newspaper, which is the Newtown Bee, their website was hacked, and their front page had been overtaken with a page of nothing but Chinese text that was essentially nonsense. When people tried to interpret it in Chinese, it was not in no dialect could it make any sense, and it was essentially nonsense. But that is what happened on that. Had you ever heard that?
No, I didn't. That's real peculiar.
It's peculiar, to
Happened
say
to be
the
that
least.
day, and of course, I've heard that what Bruce Jenner's from there, right?
He is. But also remember, in
Oh,
China, on the day of Sandy Hook, there was a stabbing at a school in which 22 children were stabbed. And
oh, in
that,
China, that's right.
remember that? Yeah,
Yeah,
that day.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another connection, but it's worse than that. I mean, Adam was taking Chinese language lessons early before school each day at 7 a.m., according to them. Of course, that's not true, in my opinion, but
Yeah.
that's the narrative.
Oh, that is bizarre. Of course, then you heard Sandy Hook in the Batman movie.
Well, yeah. Oh, the Batman thing. And the Batman thing even connects all the way up to the Virginia shooting the other day in Roanoke. I mean,
Hmm.
it's the one of the guys who was who we believe was I say we, but I was I'll just say myself. I personally believe this guy was actually the boyfriend of this woman, the anchor that they claim was shot dead on live on film that morning. This guy, and his name is Daniel something, and I won't even say it because I don't want to bring the guy any more grief. But uh, he apparently was dating her up until I believe it was 7 or 8 months before the shooting is when it ended.
Oh, that's the dark-haired guy, right?
Yeah, the darker,
With
well, the
with
guy
all the
that's
with all the photographs that you said.
all the photo, yes,
Yeah.
and the ones that he loaded beginning after this shooting, he began to load them all to Facebook. He had virtually nothing of her at all. If not, I mean, may have had no photos of her loaded prior to this shooting. So we got to keep in focus that because that's a significant factor. People tend to think of circumstantial evidence as no form of evidence, and I see it as circumstantial evidence, and the
Yeah.
government is using it all the time. So
Well, it's cumulative too. So
yes, yes, over time it can form a picture with different pieces. So we see this guy; he seems to be very much in love with this woman, and there seems to be a relationship there. But then, for no apparent reason, it ends, and then this goofy guy with the red hair who's got the scrapbook to try to prove that he dates this woman.
he
Which is
carrying her everywhere he goes, apparently. Yeah.
exactly. He is said to be the more recent boyfriend. But then when there's problems in the narrative and it seems that there's reason to question that part of the story, then they explain that well, it was a secret relationship. They were keeping it a secret. So, but of course, now that she's dead, it's okay to come out and share it all with the world and share all the photos and express how hot and
He's just so happy he had her for as long as he did. That's how people react when they lose a dear loved one.
yes, that's
I'm just so
well,
happy it wasn't a long time. I'm just happy that you know,
well, it just, yeah, brought a smile. In other words, her death really brought a smile to his face. And yeah, I don't mean to be morbid about this, but that's in the end, that's what we're looking at, and it's pretty sad. But the Batman thing was this Daniel guy. It just seemed like the guy everywhere you looked in those images, there was more. And then something else that was
I'm
used.
sorry. How was he connected to the shooting in Aurora?
Well, no, I mean, just I'm talking about Batman.
Oh,
Like
oh,
there are
oh, oh, oh.
numerous. So in other words, somebody had suggested that, and it may not even be related specifically to Aurora, but it relates in the sense that the Batman theme and imagery
Okay.
was used. Of course, it was the film, and that's very important to note too, because that was the film being seen, and that's the film that was chosen to be the one where for whatever reason, it just so happened to be, or it was deliberate, either way. But there's a theory that Batman symbology may be either used as a trigger mechanism or a sign of some kind, or just simply symbolic of a group or a project or something. And so it's not unusual to find it connected to some of these events and things. And especially with these shootings, right? We have shootings. So we have kind of I think what they're maybe doing a little bit of is they're trying to, because obviously it's becoming very fantasy like. Nothing adds up. Sometimes it doesn't even work in scientifically or physically it wouldn't even be possible. Some of what they explain to be the stories related, to explain these shootings that take place. And so, if they're creating kind of a fantasy world, well, if you look at Batman and you think about some of the various aspects of the Batman storyline, both in the comic book and in some of these other in the films that have emerged, and some of the books, and there are various related themes, or rather, just kind of threads that were built around that. And also Gotham City, right? I mean, Gotham City is very famous, famously connected to Batman. But if you look at the Gotham City map, I've realized all of a sudden, it took me, I'd never noticed this. And then finally I realized, oh my God, every damn thing on this map relates to H.P. Lovecraft. And if you don't realize that, obviously you're missing something, right? You're not going to get it. In fact, and Lovecraft had written a short story that became part of maybe a three-story novel thing or something. And I think it was called The Children of Red Hook, I think is the name of it. And it's a story of a slaughter of children at a school. It's
Oh,
another,
wow, wow.
yeah, well, I mean, there's that. It's not an exact correlation, but when you add the map thing and the whole Sandy
Hmm.
Hook and pointing at it, which occurred in the movie, that everyone pointed to, which I found to be very almost a non-issue. I cannot relate, and I don't appreciate information that's given to me that, I mean, I take it in. I say, well, thank you, great, when we move on. But anybody who gets excited about that needs to remember that, well, wait, there's the rest of the story here. We have a problem. If you're going to point to this and say, look, you need to be able to finish that sentence and tell me what I'm looking at. I understand that there's a very bizarre coincidence thing happening. But in no way am I going to. It's kind of like when the George Zimmerman trial was going on for the shooting of that black kid and the hoodie thing and all that. It just so happened that during that 2 weeks that the George Zimmerman trial was going on, that for some bizarre reason, I guarantee it, the guy himself, the famous George Zimmer from the Men's Warehouse, was fired from his own company. So we have George Zimmerman in the news headlining, and then George Zimmer being fired from his own company, the first time he was in the news for any reason in decades, probably. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
What does that mean? Yeah, what about the girl who was wound up dead in that water tank above that shabby hotel in L.A., right? That woman's name, because that woman then, her, apparently it was connected when they tested the water, and then there was an outbreak of, what was it, tuberculosis or something? I can't remember what the outbreak was of, but of a certain illness experienced an outbreak in that community, and it was related to this woman who wound up dead in this water storage tank that was used to supply water to this hotel. And people called and complained about the sweet taste of the water that they were
Jeez.
drinking. But the thing is that the woman's name was Alyssa Lamb. Well, this is the weird thing. Here we go. As it turns out, there is a test that was developed for whatever this illness is. So I imagine it isn't tuberculosis, but whatever it is, there was a test that was developed, and it is called, to this day, the Lamb Alyssa test. Okay? And her name was Alyssa Lamb. Okay? Now, how does that work? I mean, do you reconcile that? Well, you can't. So what do you do with it? Well, that's why I can't get excited about these things. I just note it,
Yeah,
and
because you don't.
and
Yeah, yeah,
well,
you
so
don't.
the Batman connections, what do you do there? It's the same thing. We don't, the production guy, the Batman production guy was killed, and then kind of an interesting, an odd auto accident in the community there in
Yeah, in
Newtown.
Connecticut. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and his wife was somewhat vocal about education matters, and there's actually a video of her very strongly voicing her opinions at the school, at a town council, or maybe a board of education. I saw once and was impressed with her in that respect. But it's her husband that was this Batman movie production assistant or something. And so there's another tie in there. But what do you do with this information? But at least I saw some value when the map, after they pointed, and this is the thing, when people said, "Look, in this film, they're showing a map, and the guy points at it, and it says Sandy Hook written on it," and then it's that very map that people then went to look at for additional clues. And here it is. I downloaded a version that was massive. It's 3,000 by 6,000 pixels or something. So it was very detailed. I found that exact map. Of course, it didn't have all the handwritten note stuff on it, but it showed the map of Gotham City, as it turns out. And what did I find? I find that everything on that map essentially relates to H.P. Lovecraft. But no one else had seemed to find that to be of interest. And that's, again, it's the same thing. I wasn't able to find a reason to shout from the rooftops that, look, there's a connection to H.P. Lovecraft once I noted it. But for the same reason, nobody else really had any kind of game changer or definitive expose in showing this Sandy Hook appearing on that map. But it was interesting, and there are clues, I think, sometimes to things. I don't think much of it is intentional. I hate to be this way. I think a lot of it is kind of simply the way of things. Like if you think of thought forms as like waves, if you meditate, you can, you essentially create more energy, and it's measurable. And I can see that if that's true, without knowing anything else about it, it does open the door to the potential or the possibility that these things, if it's a waveform, you may broadcast your thought or influence other people in some subtle way. And so this eventually then results in the George Zimmer effect, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know any other way to account for it, and that seems like the best. And if they are doing it on purpose, this is very hard. I don't want to discourage from research into this area, but it's like, and you've probably seen much of this in this conspiracy
Well, it's
research.
planted on purpose. Yeah.
Well, the planet on purpose thing, and also like some of the the stuff that, like when people are posing in photos and they put their hands together and they form a triangle as they're resting their hands there, or they're
Hmm.
standing or something, and they say, "Look, he's forming that Illuminati
Yeah.
pyramid shape." And I'm thinking to myself, look, okay, maybe, but what happens? Go stand around for a while and then see what you do with your hands. And after a while, you don't want to put them in your pockets, so you start doing things, and you
Yeah.
may put your hands together and tent them. And so I think some of that, or the shaking of the hands, where they give the Illuminati shake.
Mm.
Well, if you've ever shaken someone's hand who didn't know how to shake hands very well, or was a little bit weird about it, like they had a dead fish. We've all shook the hand of someone who had a very weak,
Yeah.
limp wrist. It's very unusual,
Yeah.
and it's kind of yuck. But there's also the person who grips immediately and doesn't let go, and kind of it's not that they want to get a lot of your hand. They sometimes just grip two fingers, and they think they've gotten a shake going on there. It's just,
Yeah.
but you have to realize. And so when I think of someone like oh gosh, anybody could be the Queen shaking hands, or any of these figures, the Pope or something. They do shake hands, and it does appear at times that they do a Freemasonic or an Illuminati handshake, and it's possible. And that's one example in which I can see it's possible that they would do that. And of course, they're always going to be photographed, and so it's very hard, I think, for them to maybe find. It may not make sense if they're going to shake hands, and it's important that they do it a certain way to reveal something. I think it maybe is a communication going on there. It's possible, and I can see why they might have to do it openly, and it would get on film because of how everything they do is especially when they meet with other dignitaries and stuff. They might basically always have to assume that, well, we're going to be on camera no matter how we do it, and so they do the special shake. But I mean, I'm just reminded of a Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns shakes the hand of the new German Shepherd that the Simpsons get, and then he pauses and says, "I think this dog has been in Skull and Bones," because he does the shake. Something about the shake says, "Ah, wait, He's doing the thing. I don't know what it
That's
was,
pretty good. Well, I guess that's the best way to end the interview tonight.
but I think so. Yeah, that'd be
That's pretty
great.
good.
I'm not taking credit for it. That's all Mr. Burns.
Yeah, I think he's been skull and bones. I had someone point out to me that Burns, when he talks, sounds awfully like David Rockefeller. So,
Oh, yeah, he does a little bit.
so there.
Wow.
I've heard
Hey,
that several
thank you,
times.
Harry Shearer, who
Yeah,
voices him.
exactly. So,
So
well, listen, Peter, thanks for coming again tonight. I knew we'd branch out into some pretty weird stuff, but that's, hey, that's the way the world works.
absolutely. It's worth it. It is because when else are we going to have these conversations? And
Exactly.
somebody's going to have to.
It certainly won't be a Thanksgiving dinner. So, but
Thanksgiving amongst the alternative media. We'd
yeah.
have to, maybe we'll have one of those someday, but until then, I would agree. Yes. Keep
Okay.
it
Well,
to more
listen,
lighter fare.
thank you for coming in tonight, and good night.
Good night. Thanks, Tim.